Have you ever felt that certain questions rest quietly inside the human heart, waiting to be asked but rarely spoken aloud? Questions about where we came from, what forces once walked the earth, and why fragments of ancient stories still echo in so many cultures. When the night grows still, when the noise of the world fades, the heart begins to whisper, "What have we forgotten? What lies hidden in the silence of history?" In our time, we live surrounded by lights, by machines, by the steady hum of progress. Yet beneath this layer of modern comfort, there is still an emptiness, a longing for deeper meaning. Humanity has always carried this yearning, for stories that remind us of how small we are in a vast creation, and how mysterious our beginnings truly were. When we open ancient texts, it feels as though a door creaks open into another world, a world filled with wonders both beautiful and haunting. Among the fragments of scripture and forgotten manuscripts lies one such door, the Book of Giants. It is not a book most people know. It was hidden away, scattered in broken scrolls, preserved in the sands of time. And yet, even in its incomplete form, it breathes with stories so strange, so majestic, that they invite us to pause, to listen, and to drift into a quiet place where myth and history intertwine. The Book of Giants is said to be connected with the story of Enoch, that mysterious man who, according to the old writings, walked with God and was taken away before he ever tasted death. His story, already wrapped in mystery, expands into something even larger within these forgotten pages. Giants, mighty beings of enormous strength, born from a forbidden union, move through its verses. They are neither fully human nor fully angelic. Their presence lingers as a reminder of a time unlike any other, a time erased from common memory, but preserved in whispers. Why would such a story be hidden? Why did generations after generations pass it over in silence? These questions press softly on the heart, not to alarm, but to invite. For what has been forgotten does not vanish. It rests quietly, waiting to be found again. Think of the world before the flood, when the earth was said to be young and the sky hung low, and mankind lived longer lives than we can imagine. Into this ancient world came beings whose stature and power defied the imagination. The Book of Giants places us there, letting us feel the tremble of the ground beneath their steps and the strange sorrow of their rebellion. Yet it is not only a tale of fear, it is also a story of warning, of the fragile balance between creation and corruption. And so, as we begin this quiet journey together, let us not rush. Let the story unfold like the slow turning of old parchment. Let the weight of ages settle gently on your heart. This is not just a history lesson, nor a tale meant to dazzle. It is a story meant to be felt slowly in the spaces between words. Like a lullaby carried across centuries, it draws us closer to mysteries that refuse to be silenced. Imagine yourself holding one of those weathered scrolls found in the caves of Qumran, where fragments of the Book of Giants were discovered. Dust still clings to its edges. The ink, faded but enduring, carries voices from a time when the world was young. You trace the lines with your eyes, and suddenly you are no longer here. You are standing in the twilight of an ancient world, where the children of heaven once looked upon the daughters of earth, and something forbidden was born. Yet before we rush into those details, pause for a moment. Feel the quiet. Feel how your breath slows when you lean into forgotten stories. These are not tales to be consumed quickly. They are rivers meant to be stepped into gently, allowing the current to carry you. For in this river there is both wonder and sorrow, beauty and warning, light and shadow. The Book of Giants does not give us every answer. In fact, it gives us fragments, pieces of a shattered mirror. But even in fragments, the reflection is powerful. The giants cry out with dreams that terrify them. Angels rise to warn them. and the fate of the earth trembles on the edge of decision. Though broken, the story sings with a music that has never fully gone silent. And as you listen tonight, as you let these words wash over you, remember that you are stepping into a very old silence. A silence broken only by voices that speak across millennia, inviting us to wonder. This is the beginning of a journey into mysteries that many have tried to bury, but which still rise like forgotten stars, waiting to be seen again. So rest your thoughts. Let the weight of the day slide from your shoulders. Allow the story to wrap around you like a gentle cloak. There will be giants here, and angels, and men caught in the spaces between. There will be warnings and dreams, shadows and light. But for now, we stand only at the threshold, listening to the faint whispers that call us deeper. And before we step further inside, let me pause and speak to you directly. If you are here, it means your heart is searching, just as mine is. So let us walk this path together. If you are listening, I invite you. Subscribe to this channel so you can continue to rest with these ancient stories. Tell me your name and your city in the comments. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from and at what time of day. And if you wish to read more, to hold in your hands the complete Bible with its 88 books and the Book of Enoch in English, you will find the link waiting in the description below. Now, with the doorway open and the night calm around us, let us step softly into the world of giants. In those early days, the earth was covered in a peace that is hard to fathom. Under the light of a kinder sun, the river's waters glistened like flowing glass, and their purity reflected the skies above. While valleys stretched out in verdant abundance, each meadow teeming with life, mountains stood as everlasting protectors, their peaks brushing the heavens. While birds filled the air with songs unbroken by fear or sorrow, trees rose tall and dignified, their branches spreading wide like arms raised in praise. Every blade of grass seemed to be alive, and every breeze carried the aroma of an untouched creation. Before discord ever dared to whisper, harmony existed in this world, which was impervious to corruption. Humanity was in tune with the earth's rhythm. The sun rising and setting, the seasons changing, and the rivers flowing were the slow rhythms of their lives, not the ticking of clocks. Children's laughter reverberated throughout the open fields as they ran barefoot on the soft ground. As if the earth itself delighted in providing, families worked the land together, easily harvesting fruit from the soil. Animals were free to roam around, unhindered by danger or fear. Every creature appeared to understand its role in a magnificent, cohesive design, and there was balance, a delicate yet lovely balance. There was a soft wonder in the nights as well. The heavens awoke in a sea of stars brighter than any sky we know today, as the sun sank below the horizon. The moon glowed with a silver warmth that enveloped the world in peaceful rest, and constellations stretched like painted tails. People gazed up in wonder, their hearts naturally gravitating toward the one who had installed these lights. They sensed heaven's proximity in a way that we can only dimly perceive now. We no longer recognize the grace with which life itself moved. Every breath brought vitality to the lungs, and the air was pure and rich. The strength of the soil yielded incalculable fruits, food that fed the body and the soul. The history of humanity is deeply ingrained in the land, and its years span centuries. Grandchildren strolled alongside great-grandfathers whose eyes had witnessed almost 1,000 seasons as generations coexisted. Age brought wisdom, and time itself seemed less like a passing moment and more like a river. But there was a shadow that persisted in this tranquility. Although it wasn't yet powerful or obvious to the naked eye, it was there and waiting. Because the human heart had its own silent restlessness, even in paradise. The potential for desire and yearning for more than what was provided was not eliminated by the world's beauty. Thus, the seeds of discord were already being sown, even as the earth breathed harmony. Before the flood, the earth resembled a large canvas that had been painted with the purest hues. However, Even the best canvases can be tainted by the careless touch of one hand. That hand started to trace lines of darkness across the light slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. People started reaching out for things that were out of their place and becoming hungry for things that were not theirs. Envy grew between brothers. Pride took root where there had once been humility, and jealousy stirred in quiet corners. The earth's tranquility diminished gradually, like a lantern gradually losing its brightness rather than abruptly disappearing. Laughter started to give way to rivalry. Families that had previously been united started to voice their complaints. Despite its abundance, the earth felt the pressure of greed. Whereas humanity used to be satisfied with walking in humility, some people started to envision themselves as strong, higher, and more deserving of their position. And the heavens watched over the earth, because the stirring of desire was not limited to humans. This world of peace and beauty was despised by beings superior to humans, beings made to live in higher places. Men's daughters, shining with purity, caught the attention of eyes not supposed to stay. What started as a glance quickly developed into longing, which in turn led to plans. Once firmly established, the line separating heaven and earth started to wane. Nevertheless, the earth itself appeared oblivious, carrying on with its offerings. Children played beneath the open sky, rivers sang, and crops grew tall in the fields. However, it was impossible to ignore the underlying force of change indefinitely. The birds' songs sounded a little more remote, as if they could sense things that men could not. Once peaceful and fearless, the animals started to stir uneasily. And even though people were still enjoying plenty, they had questions in their hearts that made them less innocent. It's odd how corruption creeps in unnoticed. Instead of using violence to break through the gates of peace, it creeps in like a shadow at sunset. The inhabitants of that ancient world continued to see the beauty all around them, to believe that they were whole, and to live in years that were beyond our comprehension. However, beneath the surface, pride rose, greed spread, and desires started to influence fate. The same things that used to make people happy were now causes for jealousy. Rather than inspiring gratitude, the earth's abundance stoked a desire for power. Like glass in the sun, the world before the flood was both flawless and brittle. Cracks were appearing, but it reflected light beautifully. Cracks that would enlarge until the picture was unsupportable. Even though people were still planting, building, laughing, and singing under the stars, the shadow was growing in the sky. Although it was only the beginning, neither the flood nor the judgment had yet arrived. The tranquility of the early world is now only a faint recollection of what creation appeared to be in its most pristine state. Even in that tranquility, however, darkness had started its gradual ascent until harmony would be disrupted and the earth itself would tremble under the weight of its corruption. They arrived silently, like a gentle wind coming down from invisible heights, rather than with thunder or the shuddering of the heavens. Back then, the earth was serene, the rivers were steady, and the nights were full of stars that glowed so brightly that they resembled burning jewels strewn across a velvet sky. And the watchers started to approach in that silence. Their position among the heavens was guaranteed by divine decree, and they were creatures destined to stay in higher realms. But something awoke within them, a fascination, a desire, a curiosity that drew them down toward the frail lives of men and women. It was merely observation at first. They gazed upon humanity in awe from their lofty vantage points. They observed men toiling in the sun, their hands working the soil, their brows perspiring, their voices rising in frustration or laughter. They saw mothers holding their kids while they sang gentle lullabies that reverberated throughout the night. They heard prayers whispered into the silence, songs of gratitude, and voices raised with both fragility and faith. The watchers had never experienced anything like these in the order of heaven. They were drawn to the frailty of humanity. Humanity was not eternal. In comparison to the boundless expanse of heaven, their lives were like flickering lamps. The watchers were amazed by the light that blazed within those fleeting lives. In contrast to the heavenly host's perfection, there was a beauty in the way men loved, wept, and maintained hope despite adversity. They were unable to ignore its rawness, imperfection, and power. They saw how the kids developed, from stumbling to strong steps, from babble to wise voices. They were in awe of the ties that bind families together and the way that one generation looks out for the next. They witnessed embraces that could heal fear and laughter that could soothe grief. Something deep within these beings was stirred by the richness of the simplicity of human life. Those who had only ever known the perfect order of heaven felt that what was ordinary to humanity was extraordinary. Not all of the watchers descended at once. They arrived gradually, one after the other, each beckoned by their own silent desire, like shadows growing longer with the fading sun. They initially only existed on the periphery of human existence, by rivers where women drew water, on hillsides where shepherds cared for their flocks, and at dusk when families gathered to eat bread. Silent observers, they maintained their distance, but they were unable to look away. They were most fascinated by men's daughters. Their faces lit up when they laughed, their hands were soft when they looked after kids, and their eyes were strong when they patiently endured adversity. The watchers had witnessed the brilliance of stars, but this beauty seemed more intimate, warmer, and perilous. It was the closeness of earth, full of touch, breath, and life, not the far-off perfection of heaven. One of them might share what he had witnessed in a whisper. A woman with gentle hands weaving cloth, her voice humming as she worked. Another described a young girl carrying water from the well, her smile shining in the sunlight and her footsteps soft on the ground. The watchers were further drawn into desire by these images, which left their mark on them. What they witnessed evolved from creation to longing, and longing started to influence decision-making. But a line was crossed with each step down. Their purpose was to observe, not to participate. They were guardians, not friends. However, desire has the power to rewrite purpose, and fascination has the power to soften resolve. They were now tempted by the earth that had been their charge. But they continued to descend gently. They did not bring disruption or violence. They arrived like a silent mist that hovers in the air, unseen but present, drifting into valleys. Even if no one was around, a man could get the feeling that someone was watching him. It could make a woman feel cold, as if the night itself were drawing nearer. Heaven knew what was coming, but humanity did not yet know. Every step, glance, and heart that strayed from its designated spot was seen by the divine's eyes. The distinction between heaven and earth started to become hazy for the watchers. They got to know the rhythm of planting, the weight of tools, and the texture of woven cloth as they moved closer to the lives of men. They observed kids playing in fields, chasing each other while laughing uncontrollably. They observed feasts where families came together to share stories and bread, their happiness brimming into the night. The watchers started to yearn for these transient pleasures of earth after having previously only experienced the boundless harmony of heaven. More than their outward looks, humanity was beautiful because of their resilience, bravery, and creativity. The watchers were in awe of how men fashioned wood into useful tools or carved stone into homes. They were astounded by the ability of women to skillfully weave life from the soil by transforming seeds into food. Every act of love, every moment of laughter beneath the stars, and every act of survival were all poetic to them, and they lost their restraint as they marveled. One might have assumed that their position in the heavens would serve as an anchor and that their purity would protect them. However, the longer they stayed, the more they noticed desirable things in addition to beautiful things. Envy turned into longing, and wonder turned into envy. When longing is fed by forbidden ground, it spreads like a dangerous seed. The watchers' decline was gradual rather than abrupt. They assured themselves it was harmless, that admiration was not betrayal and that watching was not a crime. But gradually, their hearts shifted, and soon it was insufficient to just watch. They longed to touch what they had only seen, to bridge the gap between heaven and earth, which had gotten too great to bear. The watchers of heaven turned into earthly nomads in the moonlit nights and peaceful fields. They had departed from their proper location, attracted by desire rather than order. A shift had started, even though the world still appeared to be at peace. The rivers were still singing and kids were still playing. Even though the cloth was still intact, the unraveling had begun when a thread was pulled from the enormous tapestry. Although the descent was mild, soft, and almost tender, it marked the start of something much bigger that would influence not just the destiny of humans, but also that of heaven and earth as a whole. The world would never be the same after the Watchers arrived because they had crossed a line they would never be able to uncross. They were not like any other child when they were born. With the same shaky expectation as any woman, their mothers carried them, hoping for laughter in the house and footsteps that would one day reverberate through the fields. However, as these kids grew, their size, presence, and very nature seemed to proclaim the arrival of something completely different. Their eyes gleamed with something otherworldly, as if the heavens themselves had poured into them, and they were taller than men's sons and wider than their fathers. The world would learn to know them as the Nephilim, the children of heaven and earth. Initially, there was awe. The daughters were so beautiful that even the sun was shocked, and the sons were so strong that the villages whispered about them. These children spoke in voices that carried farther than the wind, lifted stones too heavy for grown men, and ran with strides faster than hunters. Their mothers regarded them with admiration and pride, recognizing both the familiar and the unfamiliar in them. Although they had a human appearance, they were distinguished by something more. The Watchers, their fathers, watched with pride, thinking they had introduced a new form of greatness to the world. However, greatness comes with a cost, and soon that cost started to weigh heavily on everyone. The Nephilim's hands were too powerful for games intended for smaller frames, and they quickly outgrew their playmates. A simple embrace, a thoughtless act, could be harmful. They experienced intense emotions, such as anger that burned like fire, sorrow that reverberated like storms, and joy that echoed like thunder. Furthermore, those feelings were never subdued in silence due to their magnitude and strength. The ground appeared to tremble as they laughed. Their cries resounded across valleys when they wept. Whole households were afraid of what might happen when they became enraged. They still yearned to fit in. At first, these were kids attempting to make sense of themselves, not monsters. They looked to their mothers for love, and the warmth of human affection taught them how to be tender. They turned to their fathers, who taught them the arts of knowledge, the mysteries of the sky and the earth, the wisdom of metals and stars, the secrets of roots and hidden powers. They inherited gifts from both parents, but those gifts made them unique. They were always different, always bigger, and always stronger, regardless of how hard they tried. Fascination mixed with uneasiness among the populace. Some revered the Nephilim as warriors, guardians of families and fields. Their strength served as a shield in times of peril, and their size made them defenders against beasts. Others, however, watched in horror, wondering how such creatures could coexist with humans. What if they became cruel with their strength? What if they became overly hungry? When the Nephilim appeared, men were forced to consider their own weakness, which made many people uncomfortable. This tension was felt by the Nephilim themselves. They were aware of the awe, the whispers, and the distance that others had for them. They sought company, but frequently encountered only fear or awe. Their playmates couldn't keep up with them, so friendships were short-lived. Love was difficult because who could hold them without shaking? Their hearts were troubled by this loneliness. They belonged completely to neither of the two worlds they stood between. As they grew older, their appetite grew to a size that was beyond the capacity of the fields and herds. A single Nephilim could eat a meal that would feed a family for days. Their villages strained under the weight of supporting them, and their mothers found it difficult to provide. Sometimes, motivated by the gnawing emptiness within, they would venture far into fields or forests. That hunger, both physical and spiritual, became a characteristic of their identity. By teaching their kids arts that are forbidden to humans, the Watchers inspired their kids. They discovered how to shape metal and create weapons that no man had ever seen before. They studied signs and enchantments, the ways of the stars that men were never supposed to know, and the secrets of roots and stones. The Nephilim took pride in these teachings and believed they were meant for greatness. However, their greatness further distanced them from common men. What started out as awe developed into power. Nevertheless, despite their increasing strength, the Nephilim continued to feel the attraction of humanity. A giant might get down on his knees to console a fallen child. A Watcher's daughter might weave cloth with her mother while humming the same tunes she grew up hearing. While their angelic blood carried them above the earth, their human blood bound them to it. They were constantly torn between pride and tenderness, between the desire for approval and the desire to be in charge. They had a wide range of emotions. Their mother's large arms cradling women who seemed so small against them could bring them to tears of love. However, jealousy also blazed brightly. Their rage could shatter walls and send families reeling in fear when they felt ignored or resisted. Their power magnified everything within them, but they were not intentionally evil. A Nephilim's rage could destroy an entire village, just as a man's rage could shatter a branch. Nevertheless, they experienced dazzlingly beautiful moments in their lives. Some built, carved homes out of stone and raised pillars that reached the sky with their strength. Some took on the role of community protectors, keeping watch at night and deterring predators with their mere presence. Youngsters looked up to them and aspired to be as tall, strong, and brave as they were. The Nephilim experienced a brief sense of inclusion during those times, as if they actually belonged in the world. However, that kind of harmony was brittle. Over time, their differences, dominance, and appetites put strain on the Earth's equilibrium. Villages became restless, families cautious, and men wary. Frustration also increased among the Nephilim themselves. They were too human to ever break free from the world's hold, but they were also too great for it. Their souls were tormented by this conflict, which compelled them to make decisions that would affect not only their own destiny, but also the destiny of the world. The nature of the children of heaven and earth was never simple. They carried tenderness and rage, light and shadow. Their story was one of longing, for understanding, for purpose, for connection, rather than just fear. They were not only physically enormous, but also emotionally enormous, with a profound awareness of everything that reverberated throughout the country. Their anguish could tremble foundations, their grief could cloud the sky, and their laughter could fill valleys. And in that emptiness of existence, the world's delicate equilibrium started to slant ever so slightly in the direction of a future it could not yet envision. Sleep did not bring rest to the giants, as it did to regular men when they closed their eyes. Rather, the night turned into a huge ocean where shadows whispered truths too heavy for waking ears, and visions rose like waves, like veils of mist that encircled their minds and transported them to realms beyond time and the earth they walked on. Ohia, Hahia, and Mahaway experienced frequent dreams. These were not tender dreams. They were filled with mystery, dripping with terror, and yet tinged with an odd beauty, as if the heavens themselves were communicating in coded languages. Oya's dreams frequently started in silence. Under his feet, he would see the earth stretched out, the rivers shimmering in the moonlight like silver threads, even though the fields appeared to be endless, gentle, and serene. His eyes were constantly drawn to the horizon. There, shapes too big to measure would stir, and the skies would start to darken. As if alive, mountains would bend and tremble, rising higher than they should. He would attempt to approach them, but the ground would get softer underfoot with each step, drawing him down as if the dirt itself desired to engulf him. He would wake up with a shiver, his chest heavy with fear, his heart thumping like drums as the sound of deep water filled his ears. Hahaya's evenings were unique. His dreams were fierce and unrelenting like storms. Suddenly, he would witness fires rushing across the hills, consuming the forests. Lightning would split the skies, and voices that were neither human nor angelic, but something in between would roar in the clouds. He would watch as the people dispersed like leaves, their cries echoing through the thunderclap. And above it all, he would see giants like himself, with faces that were both familiar and unfamiliar, eyes that were empty and mouths that were open as if they were calling out, but he would never hear any words. Even though he knew deep down that it was more than a vision, he would wake up from these dreams shaking, his huge body trembling like a child's, and he would whisper to himself that it was just a vision. The weight of Mahawe's dreams was different. They arrived in such silence that it felt like a cloak pressing down on him. He would wander through deserts where everything was silvered by the cold light of the stars, which burned brighter than the sun. The sand would shift under his feet as he walked for what seemed like days, until he finally reached enormous water walls that rose higher than the sky itself and resembled glass mountains. The sea would remain still and frozen, but he could see shadows moving within it. Strange, enormous creatures that turned slowly as if they were observing him. He would extend his hand toward the water wall, but the sea would collapse over him before his fingers could make contact with it, and the silence would erupt into a roar. His chest hurt as if he had actually drowned, and he always woke up gasping. Frequently, the three of them discussed what they observed in low tones. When others had gone to sleep, they would lean close to the fires, speaking softly, as if they were afraid the night itself might hear them. Oya would tell of the soft earth that dragged him down and the shivering mountains. Hahya would describe how the forests were consumed by fire and how the sky was torn apart by voices too big to handle. Mahawe would also describe the icy oceans, the eerie darkness behind the water, and the deafening silence that engulfed him. Even though they didn't always comprehend, they instinctively knew that these weren't your typical dreams. Their world was filled with long, sleepy nights, and when they attempted to close their eyes once more, the same visions came flooding back, unfolding like threads in a tapestry too vast for them to fully comprehend. The meaning of the whispers in the night pressed against the giants' hearts, even though they were not expressed in words. As if the heavens had started to agitate against their lives, they sensed a warning and a burden of judgment within the visions. Despite their immense power, the dreams made them feel insignificant and helpless, like kids facing unstoppable forces. Their dreams were frequently filled with enigmatic imagery. Oya occasionally saw reddening rivers that resembled blood veins running across the valleys. The stars would fall from the sky in Hahya's dreams, tumbling like sparks from a dying fire. In his dreams, Mahawe would hear voices addressing him by name, but he was never able to identify the speakers. Only shadows would move in the distant corners of his vision. They carried the weight of these visions with them when dawn arrived and the light poured across the landscape. The night's whispers held on to them as they hunted, built, and laughed, reminding them of something closer, something invisible, but certain. They weren't the only ones with dreams. Other giants also started talking about visions, uncanny scenes of the earth rupturing, the seas enlarging past their limits, and the sky exploding into storms. Even though many people, he tried to ignore the murmurs, the uneasiness increased. The night seemed to have selected the Nephilim as its messengers, bringing bits of the future into their slumber. And in these pieces, a tale of a world on the verge of collapse was being told, piece by piece. Their shared vision was the most eerie of all. They both saw the same image, but in different ways, while they were sleeping under the same stars one night. a huge old tree that rises from the earth's center. Its roots curled deep into the underworld, and its branches reached the heavens. Its leaves glistened like fireflies as it first glowed with golden light. But then the tree fell into dust. The branches cracked and fell, the leaves withered, and the light started to fade. The three of them awoke simultaneously, gasping and opening their eyes wide in fear. They gazed at each other in silence, knowing without a word that they had been shown something great. They were restless because of the whispers in the night. They carried shadows in their hearts even when their days were full of laughter. They yearned for tranquility while they slept, for dreams about rivers, meadows, or love. However, the visions kept coming back, drawing them into a world where the future pressed into the present and the invisible world brushed against the mortal one. The giants sensed the weight of something approaching them, slowly but surely, like an irreversible tide. Consequently, their nights turned into a threshold, midway between rest and revelation, between tranquility and fear. They would close their eyes to the faint hum of the earth, the lull of the wind, and the rhythm of the leaves. But behind these soft sounds, the whispers of the night awaited, ready to guide them once more into mysteries too great to fully comprehend. The faint glow of dawn rested gently on the horizon as Mahaway's journey started under a sky that stretched like an endless ocean of pale blue. With a soft rhythm, his footsteps dug into the ground, each one bringing him farther into the unknown and farther away from the known. Among the giants, he had been selected to find the one man who was supposed to walk with the heavens. Enoch, the scribe, the wise man whose name echoed with reverence because of his closeness to the divine. For Mahaway, this task was both a burden and a glimmer of hope because he was desperate for answers, and the dreams and visions that plagued him and his family had gotten heavier every night. He passed through a vast, quiet desert that seemed to breathe in silence. The wind's gentle sweep caused the sands to shift, creating rippling patterns that resembled time-frozen waves. Every dune glowed as if illuminated from within as the sun rose slowly, illuminating the horizon in amber and gold hues. Mahaway felt insignificant in comparison to the vastness of the desert, even though he was enormous. His shadow extended over the sand and gradually faded away until it appeared to vanish into thin air. The silence closed in with each mile. No voices, no rushing streams, no birds, just the gentle whisper of the wind curling around his ears. Even though fear was lurking in the back of his mind, there was a strange kind of calm and stillness in that silence that moved him. He carried dreadful dreams with images of rising waters, falling stars, and trembling mountains. However, those visions seemed distant here in the vast embrace of the desert, as if the land itself were beckoning him to pay closer attention and have faith that his journey had meaning. Fear and hope were at odds in Mahaway's heart. He was afraid that Enoch would confirm that the end was imminent and that the whispers in the night were warnings etched on the fabric of time rather than just mental shadows. However, he also hoped that the wise man would present an alternative path, a strand of kindness woven into the fabric of destiny. Each stride across the shifting sands turned into a meditation on that tension, the pull of longing and the weight of fear. The desert changed as the day gave way to the evening. The first stars flickered overhead as the sky melted into gentle pinks and deep purples. With his massive frame silhouetted against the waning light, Mahaway stopped at the top of a dune and gazed up at the sky. Numerous stars were strewn across a velvet cloth, glistening like jewels. He briefly lost sight of his size, his weight, and even his fear, and all he could feel was the awe of the vast and vibrant universe. Through the icy glitter of their light, it seemed as if the heavens were bending closer and whispering secrets. Mahaway lay on the sands at night, the desert beneath him soft and cool. Sleep came slowly because his rest was frequently interrupted by the visions he carried. It was the same that evening. In his dream, rivers of fire poured out of a valley where the ground split open beneath his feet. He saw wings, wide, shadowed wings that blotted out the stars, darkened the sky instead of clouds. Then he saw a figure in bright light, standing erect in the middle of the confusion, a figure whose eyes pierced him with sorrow and kindness. The vision of that luminous presence was still burning in his mind when he woke up, and he knew deep down that his journey had not been in vain. As the days went by, Mahawe persisted despite the enormous stretches of stone and sand that tried his strength. The desert, however, provided him with peaceful company. The shifting dunes, the glinting stars, and the moon's pale light all appeared to accompany him on his journey, their quiet presence lessening the sense of isolation. Sometimes he would speak out loud in a whisper, as if the wind itself could carry his words to Enoch before him. What are the meanings of these visions? Why do we see the heavens breaking and the earth trembling? He said, "Tell me, man of God, what is written in the hidden scrolls of heaven, the desert?" It did not respond, only a gentle wind rustling through the dunes, but he persisted in speaking because it seemed to ease the weight he was carrying. The air became colder and the sands turned to stone on the 7th night of his trip. In the distance, rocky hills rose, their outlines sharply defined against the skyline. Hope stirred in Mahawe's chest. He was familiar with the tales. Enoch lived in peaceful areas, away from corruption and noise, rather than in cities or among man's towers. Maybe the person he was looking for lived somewhere beyond those hills. Anticipation accelerated his steps as he pushed forward with renewed strength. The farther he went, the deeper the nights became, the brighter the stars. He occasionally believed that he could hear faint music in the silence, such as the far-off echo of voices on the wind. He couldn't tell if it was imagination, memory, or something else. However, it gave him solace by reminding him that despite the world's abundance of images of destruction, there were also moments of beauty that persisted despite the gloom. Mahawe had another dream one night while he was lying on the rocks. He was in front of a huge scroll this time, one that was endless and had letters that were burned into it. The letters rose into the air, swirling around him, enveloping him in their light as he reached out to read. "What is written cannot be erased," said a steady, non-harsh voice. Mahawe woke up crying, not quite understanding the dream, but feeling its seriousness. What is spoken will come to pass. It told him that the answers he was looking for were close at hand and encouraged him to continue. The air felt different, almost alive, when he finally arrived in the valley where Enoch was supposed to live. A river meandered silently through the stones, its waters shimmering in the moonlight like liquid silver, while trees grew along the edges, their leaves whispering in the breeze. Mahawe remained motionless for a while, breathing deeply and causing his chest to rise and fall. He felt the fatigue of his journey pressing down on him, but underneath it, he was certain that he had reached the threshold of something sacred. Slowly, as if the ground itself were holy, he moved forward, each step laden with respect. Awe and the realization that he was getting closer to the presence of someone who had touched eternity had tempered the fear that still lingered in his heart. Even though his heart was racing with fear and hope and his mind was racing with questions, he moved with a gentleness that was out of character for his enormous frame. He had been molded by the desert and dream journey, readying him for this. The stars were bright, the night was still, and Mahawe's spirit shuddered in the silence. Carrying the burden of visions that no heart could handle on its own, he had come in search of answers. He knew that he would soon be in front of the man who walked with God, the one who could reveal the significance of the whispers that plagued his nights as the shadows grew deeper around him. Enoch lived in the peaceful areas away from the bustling cities of men, where the sound of the wind through the trees was more significant than the commotion of the marketplaces. He was renowned not for his wealth or power, but rather for something more profound and intangible: his intimacy with God. Enoch centered his life on prayer, quiet and listening with his heart, while others constructed stone towers. He was a scribe of mysteries as well as words, recording on tablets the things that were revealed to him in lucid visions. Because they were aware that he was not your typical man, those who spoke his name did so quietly. The radiance clung to him like a soft flame, and he had touched something eternal. Like the surface of a lake in the early morning before the world had woken up, he was steady and serene. People frequently found that their hearts had become lighter before he even spoke when they came to him with worries or questions. When he spoke, his voice was even and low, like a childhood melody, and his eyes had a depth that seemed to contain the reflection of both heaven and earth. He spoke as someone who had witnessed truth, and the truth itself gave weight to every word. He didn't rush his words, nor did he need to convince or prove anything. Enoch's wisdom came from love, not just from knowing things that were hidden. He was aware of men's frailties and their tendency to become arrogant despite their desire to achieve greatness. He was aware of their anxieties, longing for security, and hopes for eternal life. He did not, however, denounce them. Like a father who appreciates both his children's shortcomings and their beauty, his heart held them with compassion. He served as a link between the mortal and the eternal because of his profound humanity and his proximity to heaven. At night, he would gaze up at the stars with the intimacy of someone looking at letters in a sacred text rather than the detached curiosity of an astronomer. He perceived that the heavens were not silent, rather they communicated through patterns of light, constellation movement, and the constant cadence of the sun and moon. He heard the Creator's heartbeat in these quiet songs. Every season became a line in the poem of life, every rising sun a reminder of mercy, and every star a word of consolation to him. Those who discovered him alone frequently bore burdens they were unable to express. Some came seeking purpose in their short lives, some terrified of the world's increasing violence, and some grieving over the loss of children. Enoch offered each person presence rather than answers. His hand would rest lightly on theirs as he sat with them in silence, looking up at the invisible. And something changed in that silence. The heart found to peace, as if it had been permitted to rest in a truth too great for words. But the grief and the questions persisted. Although Enoch was referred to as a scribe, his writing differed from that of kings or merchants. He did not write to brag about the number of battles he had won or the treasures he had accumulated. With the humility of someone who had seen the edge of the infinite, they were written with reverence. His scrolls contained visions of a throne encircled by fire and song, angels descending, and heavens opening. He wrote about mysteries that were too big for most people to comprehend, but his words were consoling despite their enigma. They described a creator whose mercy was even greater than his perfect justice. They talked about a day when all the broken things would be collected and fixed, and when people would stop crying. He was not far from earth because he was so close to heaven. When children approached him with questions too big for their little voices, he would kneel so that his eyes were level with theirs and smile. He would respond to them gently, rather than complexly, telling them that they were loved, that the world was loved, and that each breath they took was a gift wrapped in light. And even though they were unable to fully comprehend what he was saying, the kids left with a feeling of security, as if they had touched a kindness that would never fade. On some evenings, Enoch would venture out into the hills by himself, where he would be unable to hear any human sounds. He would raise his arms in prayer there, beneath the stars, not with requests or demands, but with surrender. His prayers rose not out of fear, but out of love, like whispers on the wind. During those times, he sensed the separation between heaven and earth becoming thinner, and the divine's presence approached him like a tender hug. These were the times that molded him, that added depth to his eyes and light to his words. There was a rhythm of song and silence in Enoch's life. he was a cool, quiet man most of the time, but when he sang, his voice rose with a beauty that was not quite his own. Even though his songs were straightforward and filled with words of admiration and awe, they had a power that stuck in the hearts of listeners. When they heard his voice, travelers who were passing by his home occasionally stopped, motionless in the middle of the night, tears running down their cheeks for no apparent reason. His song evoked a desire for home, tranquility, and eternity by reaching the deepest recesses of the soul. Despite being a man among men, Enoch had a light that set him apart. It was the light of someone who had experienced grace, not of arrogance or superiority. His life served as a testament to what it meant to walk humbly with God, not to what man was capable of. He gave those who watched him the impression that they were witnessing a glimpse of the straightforward, reverent, and loving life that humanity was destined to lead. Heaven and earth appeared to meet in him. Despite being made of flesh and blood, his spirit transcended death. He worked with his hands, laughed, and cried, but he also heard voices from beyond the stars. Even though he was surrounded by people, his soul was already inclined toward eternity. Like a stone polished smooth by the river's flow, this tension gave his presence both weight and gentleness. The tales of Enoch's encounter with the divine were passed down in whispers from one person to another. Despite their doubts and questions, everyone felt that he possessed a unique quality that would not be seen for many generations. Even though he lived in a peaceful environment away from palaces and crowds, the reverberations of his life extended well beyond the hills where he lived. For those who came into contact with him took with them not only his words, but also the recollection of tranquility, silence, and an unwavering light. As a result, when Mahawe finally made his way to him, exhausted from the desert and troubled by visions, he did not see a man covered in flames or clad in thunder. Instead, he discovered a kind man whose very silence conveyed a sense of eternity. Instead of passing judgment, Enoch greeted him with open eyes and a heart, prepared to hear and to speak the words that the heavens had given him, words that would be filled with both hope and sorrow. The mysteries of heaven found a voice on earth in Enoch, the scribe of light, and those who listened discovered that their hearts could rest even in the face of uncertainty and fear. When the messengers came to hear from Enoch, the silence hung over the house. They had been unnerved by the giant's dreams, which were full of fire, shadows, and incomprehensible voices. Fear was not a flavor that strong beings frequently experienced, but it now clings to them like a fog. They yearned for clarification, for someone who could remove the mask that concealed these unsettling visions. Enoch's expression darkened as Mahawe presented their dreams to him. His head bowed as he listened quietly, as if the words themselves were pressing down on his heart. He was hesitant to speak because he understood that the message he had been given was one of truth rather than consolation. In the first dream, dominion and power were symbolized by a tall tree with deep roots and sky-high branches. However, in the dream, the tree was felled, its roots exposed to the light of judgment and its branches stripped. The meaning was conveyed by Enoch's steady yet gentle voice. The giants, who were mighty in stature, were like that tree. Though their strength was temporary, they had risen high and cast their shadow across the earth. They would be humbled by a hand bigger than theirs, and their power would no longer govern the world. He spoke with a gentle sadness, instead of anger, as if he was grieving for them even as he said what needed to be said. Then came the dream of waters in which a flood rose higher and higher, engulfing the land, carrying away houses, and destroying everything while lifting no one up. They were even more troubled by this dream because to them, water represented both fear and life. With a voice as serene as flowing streams, Enoch described it. A great flood would occur, a judgment not only on the giants but also on everyone who had deviated from the natural order. It would seem as though the entire world had been cleansed, its corruption and violence carried away in a wave that was impossible to stop. The meaning of the words was obvious and unavoidable. They lingered in the air like distant thunder. Symbols of fire had also appeared in the dreams, rivers boiling, stars falling, mountains burning. Even their massive bodies couldn't stop the fire that raged from the heavens, which is why the giants had shuddered when discussing these things. Enoch gently explained to them that fire was a symbol of purification and the all-pervading presence of judgment. Water would purify the world, but fire would also test it. That refining light would not stand for anything that was founded on pride and corruption. No shadow can conceal itself from a flame that burns from above, and when fire is hot enough, even the strongest stone crumbles. Enoch did not, however, speak cruelly throughout this. He was a messenger of caution with sorrow in his voice, not a shouter of wrath. He saw them as children caught in a destiny they had accepted but not fully chosen, rather than as monsters. His compassionate heart begged them to realize that their path would lead to disaster rather than greatness. Even though they were still unable to understand it, he knew the pain that was ahead, and his eyes glistened with something like pity as he spoke steadily. In uncomfortable silence, the giants listened. Some shifted uneasily, as if their pride were being overburdened by the message. Others' hearts were aflutter with feelings they were unable to identify as they gazed at the ground, unable to meet Enoch's gaze. Their destruction had been a dream, and now it had a voice. The thought of falling and being washed away was nearly intolerable to beings who had thought of themselves as unbreakable. But they knew in their hearts that what he said was true. Their dreams had not been their own. Rather, they were warnings concealed in shadows, whispers from a higher realm. But Enoch's words were not just about destruction. He explained to them that the Creator's judgment was justice rather than blind wrath, restoring equilibrium to a world shattered by arrogance and violence. He clarified that judgment was a cleansing process as well as a means of establishing peace where chaos had spread. Despite their weight, his words had an odd tenderness to them, as though there was mercy concealed even in judgment. The flood would be the solution to the earth's cries for peace and rest from the blood that soaked its soil. The giants started to experience a new sensation as he spoke: smallness. Enoch's words depicted a hand larger than theirs, a power vast enough to unmake them in a single breath, but their towering forms had always given them the impression that nothing could challenge them. Their hearts shook at the realization that, in the face of eternity, their strength was but a shadow. Even the air seemed heavy with awe in the ensuing silence, as though creation itself stopped to listen. In a deep, powerful voice that trembled, one of them asked if there was any hope. Enoch hesitated before responding, his eyes rising as if he were hearing something they couldn't. Then, in gentle yet firm words, he said, "For those who turned their ear, there was always time for mercy, but the path they had chosen was one of corruption and violence. Although the Creator had a lot of patience, it was not infinite. The warning was intended to wake them up and call their attention to their current state, not to crush them. It was no longer his place to judge whether they heeded. The message echoed in their brains like the wind-blown tones of a dying bell. His words plagued the giants for days and nights. Some became irate and laughed at the idea that anything could make them go back. Others became agitated, disturbed by the visions of fire devouring and water rising. However, the message had been sown in each of them. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to avoid it. As though the heavens themselves were repeating what Enoch had said, the dreams came back, sharper and more vivid. Enoch was exhausted from carrying the weight of the message. After he finished speaking, he went outside and raised his face to the stars while muttering prayers for both those who had listened and those who had become heartless. He sensed the steady presence of the one who had given him the words, but he also felt the weight of their fate pressing down on his soul. Even in grief, he carried the serenity of obedience because he understood that his job was to simply speak the truth, not to change their hearts. As he concluded his prayer, the night was silent, with the wind rustling the trees. However, there was a sense of heaviness in that silence, as if creation itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what lay ahead. Now, like an arrow released from a bow, the message of judgment had been spoken and was moving silently and unstoppably. With heavy footsteps, the giants made their way back to their home, their dreams reverberating in their brains, and the earth beneath them shook softly as though it shared their uneasiness. The end of the giants' era was marked by a silent unraveling that swept across the landscape like a shadow rather than the thunder of conflict or the clashing of armies. They continued to walk with pride for a while, their laughter resonating against the mountains and their footsteps trembling the ground. The dreams, they told themselves, were merely visions, weird delusions with no control over them. However, something started to shift beneath their apparent strength. The rivers appeared colder, the skies darker, and the air heavier. As if the earth itself didn't want to bear their burden, the harmony of creation drifted farther away. Once a sign of wonder, their enormous size turned into a burden. Hunger started to follow them everywhere they went, because they were consuming more than the land could produce. There was now emptiness where fields had once bloomed. Their hands and appetites drained the forests they relied on for cover, causing them to become thin. People who used to shudder in front of them now ran away from the sound of their approach in villages. Fathers covered their faces, mothers gathered their children, and prayerful voices ascended into the night sky. Once revered for their magnificent presence, the giants now encountered silence and fear. Their hearts also became quiet because of the echo of Enoch's message, which would not go away. They started to realize one by one that their time was running out. A profound uneasiness infiltrated their slumber. Their dreams now depicted silence, dispersal, and fall, rather than strength or glory. A few of them became agitated and started to wander into barren areas as though to get away from the invisible hand that was squeezing them. Others turned to violence for solace, but they no longer felt the same sense of fulfillment from their strength. As though the earth itself shrank away from their touch, each bit of devastation only served to increase the shadow that hung over them. Signs of judgment were stirring even though the floodwaters had not yet arrived. The skies became more unrelenting in their gray silence, the seas more restless, and the storms wilder. Each of the giants knew that something huge and uncompromising was approaching, even though they remained silent as they stood on tall ridges and stared at the horizon. They recalled the steady yet firm voice of Enoch as he described the fallen tree, the rising waters, and the devouring fire. Instead of being threats, his words had been truth, delicately veiled in grief, and now that truth was getting closer every day. When their end came, there was no significant uprising. Rather, a gentle shattering occurred, akin to a powerful tree at last bucking under its own weight. The giants were enmeshed in conflicts that they had no control over, whether they were between nations, against each other, or even against the weather. Some had their enormous forms lost in crashing waves as they were carried away by powerful storms. Others died in fires and earthquakes, their roars resonating like dying thunder. The hand of creation working against them was too strong for the might that had appeared limitless. They were killed by the world itself turning, not by a sword or spear. There was tragedy in their last moments, but not the expected terror. Many of them gazed up at the sky, their eyes heavy with sorrow rather than anger. They recalled their early years when they were filled with wonder and the mysteries of life were brand new. They recalled how enthralling their first steps were, how amazed they were by the stars above them, and how intimate they had felt with the world before it turned against them. Despite their size, they were still sentient beings, and during those final hours, they experienced grief, gap for what they had lost, grief for what they had become, and grief for what might have been had they followed a more gentle path. The Earth's inhabitants observed the giants disappear from view. They whispered about it with solemn wonder rather than joy. Even though the giants had caused fear, they had also become a part of the world itself. So the stories that were passed down had a hint of melancholy. Their downfall marked the end of an era, the closing of a chapter that had once enchanted the world with its power and mystery, not just the demise of hideous creatures. The valleys that had shuddered beneath their footsteps were motionless, and the mountains that had resounded with their voices became silent. The thunder of their presence gave way to deep and wide silence. The heavens appeared to lament their demise as well. Rain fell steadily and slowly, like tears shed by the sky, and storm clouds hung around longer than usual. The memory of those who once ruled the earth with great might was carried by the rising rivers along with the ruins of towns and forests. The sadness of their fall was still woven into the ground, even though their names had faded into fragments, been carried by the winds, and been etched into half-forgotten stones. What persisted most was the reminder of the message they had disregarded, not their power or even their demise. In the places where they had once stood, Enoch's voice still seemed to reverberate, soft but persistent, a whisper that creation itself recalled. Greatness without balance cannot last. Power without humility cannot endure, and beings born of defiance cannot evade the tides of justice. It was a truth written as softly as the stars are written across the sky, not a message of cruelty or hope-crushing. The scattered families of men who survived them did not forget. They told their children, who told their own, about creatures that had once transcended their boundaries, who had once brought wonder and sorrow to the world, and whose demise was both tragic and foreboding. Even though the stories had been mellowed over time, they still had the rhythm of wonder, as if remembering the giants also meant remembering how fleeting life is. The giants then faded into silence, like the last embers of a fire that once burned too brightly, rather than being wiped out in a single night. The world that they left behind would never be the same. It shook uncontrollably at the thought of their voices, their aspirations, and their demise. Creation waited for what would happen next in that silence because, even though the giants were no longer there, the story was not yet complete and the floodwaters were still collecting at the world's edges. The world was enveloped in a silence unlike any it had ever experienced when the last of the never-ending rain had stopped falling and the thunderous waves had finally subsided. Where mountains had echoed with the footsteps of giants and men, and valleys had hummed with voices, all that remained was the sound of wind rustling across a desolate landscape. The land that rose up from under the sea was not what it had been. It was as if an invisible hand had swept away the plains where kids had laughed, the gardens that had blossomed, the stone cities. In addition to washing the land, the flood had rewritten it, removing sharp edges and creating new channels for lakes, rivers, and oceans. The smell of clean, reborn earth filled the air, and the ground was moist with the memory of what had been lost. Once tall trees had vanished, their remains strewn about like whispers under the ground, waiting to be remembered only in fragments and fossils. Instead, fragile but resolute tender shoots pushed up from the softer ground. It would take time, but meadows would bloom again. Life had not ended. It had simply been reset, and the world was enveloped in a silent embrace of stillness. The air itself appeared lighter, as if it were free of the weights it had previously held. Mountains emerged from the haze, their summits shrouded in silence rather than the clamor of rebellious voices. Large and swollen, the rivers moved slowly across the landscape, their currents soft now, murmuring against freshly formed banks sculpted by the flood. Gleaming like mirrors under a sky that seemed clearer, cleaner, and infinitely blue, lakes sprang up in places where none had ever been before. The stars shone with a brilliance untarnished by the smoke of conflict or the cries of bloodshed, and the heavens were open and unhindered at night. It seemed as though the noise of human ambition had been washed away by the flood, along with the corruption of the earth. With caution, the survivors entered this new world. Their hearts were heavy with memories, but they were also buoyed by the hope that comes with a new chapter in a story. They seemed to smell the cool freshness of storm-washed air, the scent of renewal in every breath they took. They were filled with both awe and sadness as they gazed out at the serene surroundings. The silence of the present pressed just as hard within them as the memories of the laughter, songs, and faces that had once occupied the earth. Now every sound was magnified, whether it was the ripple of water against rock, the distant call of a bird, or the rustle of leaves. It sounded clear and gentle now, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself, after having been muffled by the din of a busy world. There was no hurrying in this silence. Long, soft days passed as the sun moved slowly across the sky, casting soft gold on the valleys and hills. The cool air carried a sense of peace that had not been experienced since the first mornings of creation, and the nights were gentle, cradled in moonlight and shadows. The sound of creation breathing replaced the thundering of giants and the terrified cries of men. The earth itself appeared to be sleeping, regaining its strength after a long period of work, and getting ready to rise again. The few who were still alive moved carefully, speaking quietly and taking measured steps. They constructed fires at night for comfort as well as warmth, and they enjoyed watching the flames dance against the never-ending quiet all around them. The stars above became storytellers, and the crackle of the fire became music. Speaking softly to each other, they would recount the past events in a way that was neither shouting nor boasting, but rather gentle memories, like delicate glass that could shatter if treated too roughly. As though creation itself leaned in to listen, their words mingled with the night air, carried by breezes that slipped through the silence. In this altered world, animals also appeared. They have now slowly returned to the open areas where they had previously dispersed out of fear of men and giants. Birds perched on branches and stones, their songs tentative at first, then fuller as the days went by, and deer bowed their heads to graze on new shoots. With every sound adding a fresh hue to the cleaned earth, the quiet turned into a canvas on which life started to paint itself once more. Even the wind appeared softer, sighing as it passed hills and rivers rather than howling in rage. The silence of death was not like this. Like a break between two songs, it was gentle and restorative rather than chilly or empty. Even though the flood had taken a lot, it left a silence that suggested second chances. The feeling that life had been given a gift and that time had turned over to start over was something that everyone who walked on this planet could feel in their bones. It was a meaningful silence that made room for introspection, remembering, and thankfulness. Every sunrise served as a reminder that life had not ended, but had instead been renewed, and that the world continued to turn. The morning's light was gentler, bringing with it a golden warmth that permeated fields and rivers rather than a harsh glare. Long, slow shadows extended, and even the night's darkness no longer appeared menacing, but rather protective, like a blanket of sleep. The glint of dew on grass, a bird's flight across the horizon, the smell of rain still in the soil, every aspect of creation felt more acute and personal now. This peaceful world was revered by those who survived the flood. They were aware that it had not been free. Their hearts were filled with the memories of the fallen, the giants, the crowds, the cries and laughter that were now submerged under the sea. The ensuing silence, however, was not mean. It reminded them that even grief can be followed by peace, and was gentle, like a gentle hand resting on a tired shoulder. Thus, in its renewal, the earth breathed softly as it rested. The once raging waters now lay placid, shimmering under the moon and sun, their voices muffled. After being stripped bare, the land started to redress itself in green. Calm air, free of cries and corruption, filled the lungs. For the time being, the quiet held it tenderly, like the stillness before a song starts. A new story was waiting to be written. It was a pause, a breath taken before something that was yet to unfold rather than an end. Like shadows trapped between unreadable pages, the giant's memory lingers. Once rumored in the back alleys of ancient customs, the Book of Giants now exists only in fragments, its entire narrative dispersed by the gradual passage of time. like a tapestry that has been ripped apart by innumerable hands until only a few threads remain. What's left is partial, ripped, and faded. Because absence frequently carries a louder echo than presence, the silence of those missing words feels as heavy as the story itself. Within those gaps, one senses truths too disturbing to be left in the open and mysteries too big to be fully understood. The Book of Giants began as a record, a compilation of visions, dreams, and voices that described creatures that walked the boundary between heaven and earth, back when stories were not bound in tidy volumes but rather carried in scrolls and carved into stone. However, not all records endure the turbulence of history. Numerous scrolls were destroyed by fires. Innumerable voices were silenced by war. When kingdoms fell, libraries that once contained priceless knowledge turned to ash. As a result, a large portion of the literature that had previously been composed about the giants quietly vanished, leaving behind only shards of pottery or bits of language that had been buried in caves or forgotten. Curiosity is piqued by the missing pages' possible contents, as well as their disappearance. Was it just the ink and parchment deteriorating naturally, crumbling under the weight of centuries? Or was their disappearance intentional, as if hands once thought it risky to allow such tales to survive? History is not always impartial. It forgets what priests forbid and remembers what kings permit. Maybe there were truths in the giants' stories that were too weird and disturbing for the tidy lines of doctrine that came after. Or maybe they held memories of suffering and tragedy that were put aside by succeeding generations like shattered artifacts that should not be touched. Infinite awe has been sparked by the silence created by those absent words. By assembling fragments of Aramaic texts, scholars are able to piece together glimpses of the Watcher's son's dreams, visions of enormous beasts, and warnings of fire and flood. Every piece is like a candle burning dimly in a long, dark hall, illuminating only a corner and concealing the others. The outline of a larger story that may have extended well beyond our current understanding can be discerned in these fleeting glimpses. Were there accounts of the giants' day-to-day struggles, balancing their great strength with their delicate emotions? Did they talk about regrets, about wanting heaven but being stuck on earth? Did they envision a world free from condemnation? Such unanswered but persistent questions are left hanging in the air by the missing lines. This incompleteness has a poetic quality. Now broken and lost, the Book of Giants becomes more than just a book. It becomes a mystery unto itself. What we have is a trail of echoes rather than a completed story, serving as a reminder that not all truths are neatly expressed in words. The story is as much a part of the silence as it is of the remaining words. One is encouraged to stop, think, and wonder in that quiet. Perhaps the human heart connects to the story most deeply in the blanks, in the places where the ink has faded. Lost texts have a sad and lengthy history. Great works have been lost to time, including entire libraries destroyed by fire, the epics of long-forgotten kings, and the plays of ancient poets. Once thought to contain all of the world's knowledge, the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, and its treasures were lost forever. This tragedy is shared by the Book of Giants, which serves as a metaphor for how brittle memory can be. Words are as vulnerable as the breath that speaks them, even though what is written may seem permanent. Centuries of wisdom disappear with a single spark and one act of carelessness. Both grief and beauty can be found in this fragility, because whatever endures, no matter how imperfect, becomes incredibly valuable. Today's scholars treat the fragments with emotional and physical care. Every preserved line is like a voice that has been carried for millennia, fragile but resolute. Despite their enormous stature, the words of Ohaya, Hahaya, and Mahawe still carry their hopes, anxieties, and frail humanity as they reach out from the dust of ages. These pieces serve as a reminder that stories never really die once they are told, despite their brokenness. They remain in the silent recesses of memory, in echoes, and in whispers. What about the passages we are no longer able to read? What secrets do they possess? Maybe they talked about places that are now lost to the sea and sand. Maybe they warned of cycles of corruption and rebirth, not only for their own generation, but for all future generations as well. They might have shown tender moments, such as giants bending to hear human voices or crying when they saw their demise. We are unable to know. However, the absence itself turns into a narrative, serving as a reminder that not all information is intended to be retained. Some truths are still hidden, waiting to be revealed in the quiet places of the heart and through introspection rather than on paper. We can also learn about time from the missing pages. It is simple to imagine history as a straight line, with one event after another, neat and orderly. The truth, however, is more akin to a tapestry with holes in it. Entire chapters disappear, entire voices are muffled, and what's left is pieced together using what can be saved. The Book of Giants serves as a reminder that history encompasses not only the things we currently know, but also the things we may never learn. It challenges us to accept the humility that comes with realizing our knowledge is limited, to live with mystery, and to sit with the unease of uncertainty. Nevertheless, there is solace in the thought that those lost pages are still out there, concealed in unexplored caverns or held in unbroken traditions. Scrolls may still be hidden beneath layers of stone and sand in some desert cavern, just waiting to be discovered by the right hands. The idea that stories don't always disappear, but occasionally lie dormant until the right moment for them to resurface carries a certain calmness to it. The hope itself becomes a part of the narrative, connecting us to those who came before us in a web of desire and memory, regardless of whether such discoveries ever materialize. As a result, the Book of Giants represents both memory and quiet, presence and absence. Its missing pieces reverberate with questions too big for answers, and its fragments sing with voices of a bygone era. There is a profound, subdued beauty in this harmony between the known and the lost. It is the allure of mystery, the kind that encourages contemplation rather than demanding an answer. Even though we long for the words that are no longer there, we find ourselves listening to the whispers of what is left, holding them close as the wind turns the pages of history, carrying some forward and letting others slip away. The desert has always been a place of quiet, a huge space where time seems to move more slowly, and where the wind carries the weight of long-forgotten eras in addition to grains of sand. Secrets slept for centuries in that silence, under pale stone cliffs and in the hollowed-out mouths of caverns, as if the earth itself had chosen to cradle them in silent safety. The scrolls stayed in their shadowed resting places, untouched, folded silently, waiting, while the sun rose and set. Storms moved across the horizon, and shepherds guided their flocks across the arid hills. Nearby, the Dead Sea stretched, its salt-laden waters motionless as glass under the expansive sky. Around it, the arid landscape appeared to go on forever, a place where voices were seldom heard and life was few. Nevertheless, one of the most significant rediscoveries in human history would eventually emerge from this void. It started in the middle of the 20th century, almost casually. The rhythm of heat and silence shaped the days of Bedouin shepherds who roamed the cliffs with their goats. When a boy named Mohammed Ed-Dib threw a stone into a cave mouth while caring for his flock close to Qumran, he heard pottery breaking instead of the echo of hollow rock. In a place like that where silence is the norm, and emptiness is the norm. The sound was unexpected. The first crack in a veil that had concealed centuries' worth of unsaid words was that sharp break, that delicate music of clay breaking. He and others went back to examine it, but instead of finding treasure in gold, they discovered something much more durable. Scrolls of old writing that had been preserved by darkness and dryness, sleeping in jars like messages that had been passed down through the ages. The caves themselves appeared to have been designed with secrecy in mind. Their chambers were cool even during the scorching days in the desert, and their entrances were small. As though time itself had curled up and fallen asleep, the stillness in the air inside was unaffected by the outside world. Wrapped in linen and held in clay jars that had protected them from centuries of wind, conflict, and stray feet, the scrolls waited in the darkness. When the pieces were opened, they revealed words in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek written in faded ink, psalms, prayers, laws, visions, and tales that echoed the pulse of a long-gone people. Others whispered with voices less familiar, texts about giants, visions of judgment, and angels, while others were familiar, passages from scriptures already known. The rediscovery had a surreal quality, as if the desert itself had picked this time to unveil its secret treasure. Scholars had been speculating about missing books and the voices of the past being preserved somewhere inaccessible for centuries. Then all of a sudden those voices came out of silence in the silent hands of a shepherd. The idea that even the most basic people, while strolling along deserted cliffs with their goats, could discover words that had been guarded with devotion and then forgotten over time, seemed almost like a parable come to life. That boy standing at the mouth of the cave with darkness in front of him and sunlight behind him continues to serve as a reminder of how quickly history can change and how the past can come alive again. This story seems to be interwoven with the languid rhythm of the desert. The caves did not draw attention to themselves, they were not hurried. They patiently maintained their secret for almost 2 millennia, during which time empires came and went, languages flourished and dwindled, and the outside world forgot they had ever existed. Instead of thunder or spectacle, the rediscovery was marked by the slow unraveling of cloth from ancient parchment, the sound of a stone hitting pottery, and the quiet persistence of curiosity. This preservation was aided by the landscape itself. The still shadows of the caves, the sealed jars, and the dry air of the Judean wilderness all worked together to create the ideal environment for delicate words that would not have survived anywhere else. A fresh image of the ancient world emerged as pieces were collected, examined, and assembled. The scrolls added missing voices, texture, and detail rather than merely restating what was already known. The Book of Giants was one of them. It was fragmented and unfinished, but it still contained hints of Ohia, Hahia, and Mahawai's dreams. Holding such pieces in one's hands was like holding the bridge between the past and present, with the hopes and warnings of ancient scribes still reverberating and their ink strokes still visible. Leaning closely over the parchment, scholars traced letters that, in a bygone era, had shone in candlelight and were now re-illuminated by contemporary lamps. Words and mystery had been preserved in the desert cave's stillness. Every new piece sparked inquiries. The scrolls had been placed there by whom? Were they concealed when Jerusalem was besieged during wartime, when preserving holy writings was essential to survival? Were they sacrificed, buried reverently in the ground to be concealed until a later date? Or did those with more urgent concerns just forget about them? Whatever the cause, the result was the same. A silent providence that appeared to loom over the desolate cliffs allowed the scrolls to survive rather than just by accident. The caverns themselves still have a certain charm. Entering one is like entering a room where there is a sense of anticipation, where one half anticipates hearing the faint crackle of parchment and the murmur of voices that once filled the room with prayer. As if recalling the weight of the centuries it carried, the light that filters in from the cave mouth appears softer and more muted. Standing there, one can feel the silent guardianship of stone and silence, as well as the long patience of time. In addition to altering scholarship, the rediscovery of the scrolls changed people's perceptions of the desert itself. The Judean wilderness was transformed from a place of emptiness to one that kept secrets, where caves were vaults rather than voids, and silence was fullness rather than emptiness. Numerous other treasures might be hidden beneath the surface of the endless dunes and shimmering heat, just waiting to be discovered by another curious glance or wandering step. Thus, one of the most profound experiences with the past arose from a simple act, a stone thrown into darkness. Voices that might have been lost forever had been saved by the desert's languid cadence and unending patience. The weight of that moment, the stillness of the caves, the protracted silence of centuries, and the abrupt reawakening of memory in a place where time itself seemed to dream, remains with those scrolls, which are now carefully displayed in museums and examined under glass. In addition to being transmitted by ink and parchment, stories can also be transmitted by the breath of storytellers, the chants of priests, and the memories of nomadic people. Echoes traveled across mountains, deserts, and seas, changing and reimagining what started in one location. The story of the Watchers and the Giants, of their aspirations and demise, was no exception. It traveled, not just whispered in Judean hills or locked away in Hebrew scrolls. Additionally, it changed as it traveled, absorbing the hues of the cultures it encountered, assimilating into local legends and transforming into something both familiar and novel. The fragments of the Book of Giants, which have been discovered in the Dead Sea caves as well as in Persian, Aramaic, and later Manichaean traditions, demonstrate how a narrative can cross national boundaries and become a part of the collective human imagination. The story of the Watchers and their offspring had already started in antiquity, according to the Aramaic fragments of the Book of Giants that were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Spoken extensively throughout the Near East, Aramaic was a language of commerce, empire, and connection. Stories were brought into courts, temples, marketplaces, and villages by its words. The fact that the story was written in Aramaic is proof that it was never intended to be read only by a select few. Already, its themes, giants trapped between heaven and earth, creatures that fell from heaven, and dreams that hinted at judgment, were resonating with people all over the world. The echoes found yet another resting place in Persia, with its rich and complex traditions. Certain themes of the Watcher's story appeared to be reflected in Zoroastrian cosmology, which is full of dualities of chaos and order, light and darkness. The Persian imagination naturally accommodated the notion of rebellious beings, creatures that disrupted the earth by crossing the boundaries established by heaven. Parts of the giant tradition can be found interwoven with larger stories of cosmic conflict in certain Persian texts. It is possible to interpret the giants, who were half divine and half mortal, as representations of chaos that endangered the harmony of creation, which the forces of truth and lies, Gats, were always working to restore. Their fall became part of a greater drama in which the forces of good and evil were constantly testing the world, rather than just a tragedy of beings caught in their own pride. Centuries later, the story was given a new voice by the Manichaean tradition. Manichaeism, which was founded in the 3rd century by the prophet Mani, aimed to combine aspects of Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and older Mesopotamian concepts into a single, expansive, cosmic dualism story. The tale of the giants and the Watchers was a perfect fit for Mani and his supporters, who saw the universe as being split between light and darkness. The story of the fallen Watchers was extended in Manichaean literature, where their descendants were portrayed as both giants and forces whose disobedience led to the confinement of light in the material world. Their nightmares, anxieties, and eventual demise served as metaphors for what occurs when the divine is abused and heavenly power is subsumed under the weight of worldly desires. It is remarkable to observe how the narrative evolved based on the cultural perspective. The story was closely associated with prophetic warnings, the memory of the flood and judgment, and the mystery of angelic beings going beyond their designated place in its early Hebrew and Aramaic versions. The Zoroastrian concern with the never-ending conflict between Asha, truth, and Druj, lie, was reflected in Persian thought, where the giants were viewed as representatives of chaos and adversaries of the divine order. They were associated with the greater myth of light imprisoned in matter, waiting to be released, and they came to represent cosmic imprisonment in Manichaean texts. Nevertheless, one senses the unbroken thread despite these distinctions, extraterrestrial beings blending with the human world, creating something vast and turbulent, their destiny sealed by the consequences of their decisions. Even as specifics changed and new interpretations were made, this essence persisted. That perseverance demonstrates the narrative's potency. Not only was it a local story, but it also touched on universal themes, such as the fascination with the line separating heaven and earth, the fear of uncontrollable powers, and the sadness of falling from grace after achieving greatness. The story progressed as one might expect. Along with goods, traders on the Silk Road also carried stories. As they traveled between courts, priests and academics translated ideas as well as texts. Exiles and refugees infused new soil with their stories, songs, and prayers. Scribes repeatedly copied these texts in the silence of temples and educational halls, sometimes faithfully preserving them and other times modifying them with their own cultural brush. From the first stone dropped into the waters of memory, each retelling was like a fresh ripple spreading outward. Particularly striking are the Manichaean fragments found in Turfan in the Central Asian deserts. These texts serve as a reminder of the reach of a story, even though they are far from the Judean wilderness where the first fragments were discovered. From the shores of the Dead Sea to the far-off oases of Asia, the story of the giants had traveled across languages and landscapes, transformed into a new religious vision, and carried along trade routes. The thought of that journey is almost surreal. Ideas traveling across deserts as silently as caravans under the stars, words whispered in nighttime markets, and scrolls crammed into saddlebags. Every culture that heard the story contributed its own rhythm and imagery. The words in Aramaic carried the rhythm of a people whose voices filled marketplaces and homes, and they felt personal, near the language of everyday life. The imagery became increasingly cosmic in Persian thought, interwoven with the never-ending conflict between chaos and order, light and dark. The Li developed into a grand myth of salvation in Manichaean hands, one of light trapped and longing to be freed. The story repeated itself, each echo reshaped by the rock it touched, but still carrying the original sound, like echoes bouncing off canyon walls. This cultural journey has a certain beauty. It demonstrates not only the flow of stories, but also the profound interconnectedness of human imagination across time and location. The same things that struck a chord in the Judean hills also struck a chord in Persian fire temples and, subsequently, in Central Asian communities. Despite coming from a single tradition, the giant's shadow was felt by many. To follow their story is to follow the course of history itself, to observe how writings endure not only on the paper they are written on, but also in the hearts of those who carry them forward, transforming them to fit new horizons and skies. Thus, neither the silence of lost scrolls nor the flood erased the story of the giants. It found new homes and voices, resonating subtly in cultures that may never have spoken the same language, but instead had a desire to comprehend the mystery of creatures torn between the earth and the heavens. At the core of the mystery are ragged, faded fragments of parchment. One is left wondering what might have been said if only the page had survived, because the fragments are like whispers caught in the wind, with sentences that end too soon. What is absent has a peculiar charm, and the parts that are still unsolved have a subdued strength. The Book of Giants fragments serve as a reminder that history rarely comes to us whole but rather broken, like pottery discovered in the dust of centuries past, ready to be put back together but never completely. Perhaps their true beauty is found in their incompleteness, as the omitted lines allow the imagination to fill in the gaps and hear both the words that made it through and the silence that existed between them. We see more than just words when we examine a fragment. We see how a single letter may be clear while the next has been engulfed by decay, how the edges have been frayed by time, and how the ink has been smudged by centuries of dryness or dampness. These tangible details tell us about caves where hidden scrolls were found, about climates that erased some lines while preserving others, and about human hands that rolled and unrolled them. While an entire manuscript exudes authority, a fragment offers a glimpse of a world that is just out of reach, while whispering in mystery. We sense an intimacy in that moment, as if we are bending down to listen to an old voice's final breath. Instead of being defects, the missing pieces serve as invitations. We can speculate about what happened next when a sentence is torn and ends in mid-sentence. Was it a gentle appeal for pity or a vision of fire and flood? A textual gap transforms into a canvas, a place where our own reflection emerges. The human act of wondering, the silent desire to give meaning to silence, lies beyond scholarly debate over potential reconstructions. Even after the words are gone, the fragments give us space to imagine and listen to the echoes that remain. In this sense, the incompletion itself takes on a certain beauty. Even though a flawless story would be satisfying, there wouldn't be much room for the imagination to run wild. However, an incomplete story remains in the mind for a long time after it is heard, much like an unfinished song. Only fragments of the Book of Giants, brief accounts of journeys, dreams, and judgments, remain. However, the very fact that those pieces are incomplete is what makes them move the heart. We see images of heavenly beings and tragic outcomes, giants dreaming of floods and messengers bearing words of judgment. The trail then disappears, leaving us in a state of awe, like the gain P.S. between stars that give the night sky its vastness and boundlessness. The silence that surrounds the text takes on a power equal to that of the words themselves. We can learn something about memory from the mystery of fragments. Human memory is also fragmented. We sometimes remember flashes of detail rather than continuous streams, but not always the entire story. While the rest fades into haze, a laugh, a face, or a voice tone might stay. In this way, the way we remember and the way history itself endures in fragments rather than in its entirety are reflected in the fragments of ancient texts. The broken scrolls seem to reflect the essence of remembrance rather than being the result of time passing. There is enough to evoke strong feelings even among the fragments. We read about Mahaway searching for Enoch across desolate lands and about Ohia and Hahia, giants plagued by unfathomable dreams. Even though these moments are unfinished, they sound like individual notes played on a distant harp. A single tone, pure and trembling, can evoke longing without the entire song being heard. The spaces between these pieces give the impression that they are dreams in and of themselves. Dreams that vanish when one wakes up, leaving behind only impressions and shadows. Perhaps this makes sense because the giant's tale was so interwoven with dreams that it almost seems purposeful that it has survived in dreamlike fragments. The Book of Giants' fractured structure also highlights how brittle human endeavor is. Scribes believed they were preserving truth for future generations, so they meticulously recorded everything, line by line. However, circumstances and time dictated otherwise. Parchment crumbled, caves collapsed, and moisture seeped in. What's left serves as a reminder that everything human is prone to deterioration, regardless of how meticulously we write. Ironically, though, this fragility makes what survives more valuable. A single line that is still intact feels precious, as if it were saved from extinction in the face of insurmountable odds. Holding even a single piece is like holding a bridge that spans centuries and connects us with voices that have been silenced for ages. Fragments also contain a certain humility. They serve as a reminder that we are not and cannot know everything. We learn to accept mystery from the giant's story, which has only been preserved in fragmented form. We are left with wonder instead of certainty, with longing instead of completion. The missing pages ask us to listen to silence as well as words, humbling the intellect and stilling the heart. Fragments serve as a reminder of the holiness of what cannot be fully possessed and the sacredness of the unknown in a time when people are constantly searching for clarity and completeness. The missing line's silence is not empty. Rather, it is brimming with presence. Similar to how musical pauses produce rhythm and shadows give light depth, the text's missing passages influence how the reader perceives what is left. They make us pause, stay, and dream. They transform us from passive recipients of stories into active participants in the process. Reading a fragment means participating in a cross-temporal collaboration in which we are asked to carry on a story that ancient voices have started in our hearts. Even academics are unable to fill all the gaps despite their meticulous reconstructions and comparisons. They are able to formulate theories, compare bits and pieces from various traditions, and raise possibilities. Nevertheless, despite all the research, there is still a gap that cannot be filled. Perhaps the most genuine interaction with the text can be found in that silence. Because the giants themselves were enmeshed in a mystery greater than themselves, both in their dreams and in their demise. That very mystery is reflected in their story, which has only survived in fragments. Therefore, the fragments are teachers rather than merely remnants. We learn humility, wonder, patience, and the beauty of incompletion from them. They serve as a reminder that not everything is intended to be fully understood, and that sometimes the soul is most deeply stirred by the half-heard, half-seen. They serve as a reminder that while history, like life, is never complete, it still has a beauty that transcends its imperfections. The reason the pieces are sufficient is not because they finish the story, but rather because they serve as a reminder that the tale is greater than any one telling, and even greater than the pages on which it was originally contained. And in that awareness, the missing pieces stop feeling like a loss and start to feel like a gift of mystery, of space, of silence, a place where spirit and imagination can reside. The giants were more than just physical creatures that towered over the rest of creation. They were also symbols etched into the fabric of human memory, reflections of something deeper. Speaking of them gave shape to the corruption that had taken over the world, in addition to describing enormous beings with tremendous strength. One could sense the conflict between chaos and order, good and evil, and light and darkness in their stories. The Nephilim represented excess, unbridled power, and desires unbridled by reason. Their size served as a metaphor for how sin, if allowed to run amok, can become so great that it eclipses what is modest and pure. According to the legends, the giants ate more than their fair share, consuming not only food but also innocence, justice, and peace. Their inner spiritual emptiness was reflected in this insatiable hunger. They demonstrate what happens when creation rebels against its creator, when pride triumphs over humility, and when strength forgets mercy. They served as representations of what corruption looks like at its most extreme, hollow on the inside but radiant with power, beautiful in strength but monstrous in spirit. Their demise was more than just a tale of extinct creatures going extinct. It was a mythical, cautionary tale that served as a reminder to humanity of what happens when evil is allowed to run amok. However, the manner in which these tales endure in whispers is gentle in their reminder rather than harsh or frightening. The contrast between giants and virtuous individuals like Enoch demonstrates that greatness is determined by proximity to light rather than height or strength. The temptation to turn away from that light is symbolized by the Nephilim. They serve as reminders of how easily people can be seduced into conceit and how easily desire can grow until it consumes everything around it. They are the shadows that stretch across human history. Even so, their shattered tale invites us to think, to examine ourselves, and to consider how these shadows might settle in our own hearts. The giants turn into mirrors in this way. Their actual size is found in the corruption they stand for, despite the fact that they are characterized as beings much larger than any human. They serve as a metaphor for how pride can triumph over compassion, how violence can eclipse peace, and how greed can flourish. In their stories, every culture that has spoken of them has found a way to express how unbalanced things are, and how the world is shifting from harmony to chaos. The gap between light and shadow made it seem as though creation itself was burdened with corruption when the giants roamed the earth. Their presence indicated that there had been a disruption in the order of things. However, the contrast is always present in the telling. There are light-bearers who oppose the giants of corruption wherever they may be found. Gentle and wise, Enoch uses truth rather than weapons when he speaks, his words gleaming in the darkness. While the giants are furious, Noah, who is submissive and modest, builds in silence. The narrative shifts from being about destruction to being about choice. One path, the path of arrogance, decadence, and corruption, is represented by the Nephilim. The way of humility, self-control, and light is another path that the faithful represent. Each listener of the story is encouraged to recognize the same turning point in their own life between these two. The disparity between heaven and earth is also represented by the giants. They are the result of unions that transcended boundaries and symbolize what happens when peace is lost and the sacred order is disregarded. Although they led powerful lives, they lacked the equilibrium necessary for true peace. They were too powerful, too big, and too self-absorbed. The way corruption functions in the soul is reflected in this imbalance. Corruption increases when pride triumphs over compassion, when knowledge is devoid of wisdom, and when desire becomes excessive. This very turning point, when the scale of life no longer rests evenly but instead plunges into darkness, is symbolized by the giants. Nevertheless, they have a tragic quality despite being representations of corruption. Despite not choosing to be born, they carried the burden of corruption within themselves. As though even the giants themselves were victims of the imbalance that produced them, their story thus exudes a subdued melancholy. They yearned for answers from Enoch, for future dreams, and for a way out of the shadow that loomed over them. They stand for both corruption and the sadness that results from creation being diverted from its original intent. Their story almost feels like a poem, a meditation on what happens when light is abandoned, because of this duality, tragic and terrifying. To discuss them in a spiritual context is to discuss the constant conflict between light and dark in the human heart. Even though the Nephilim are no longer there, the corruption they represented persists in more subdued forms. In every era, the giants reappear as towering temptations rather than as towering beings, unbridled violence, pride that eclipses humility, and greed that grows out of control. Because the corruption they stand for is ageless, so too is their story. They serve as a reminder that if the light is lost, shadows can linger for a long time, even in a peaceful world. This conflict between light and shadow is depicted in the gentle telling as a reminder of balance rather than as a hopeless situation. They can fall, just as the giants used to loom. Though corruption may spread widely, light never goes out. In addition to detailing their demise, the shards of their story also allude to the tenacity of virtue. Even in its fragmented form, their story's preservation is a testament to light triumphing over darkness. Because their story would have been completely lost if corruption had won out. Rather, their memory endures as a lesson rather than a victory, as silent contemplation rather than fear. When we consider the giants to be symbols, we can also see how their narrative connects to the larger human narrative. Every culture has told stories of great creatures that fell due to pride, and of shadows that rose too high before collapsing under their own weight. Among these, the Nephilim are a part of the universal human understanding that corruption, no matter how severe, cannot endure indefinitely. When the darkness has spent itself, the light, albeit usually modest and quiet, remains. The giants serve as a reminder of both the peril of excess and the tenacity of the equilibrium that they once upset. Thinking back on their story through this gentle lens has a profoundly calming effect. The giants are no longer merely ancient monsters, they are now mentors through their symbolism and teachers in their demise. Yes, they teach us what not to do, but they also highlight the beauty of light in contrast to shadow. Their violence makes peace more radiant, their pride deepens the value of humility, and their corruption emphasizes the necessity of purity. In this sense, they support the work of light even though they are symbols of corruption because their very existence indicates the way to improvement. Thus, the Nephilim continue to live in meaning rather than fear. They are recalled as shadows cast across the dawn of human history, as symbols. Their size serves as a warning about the perils of excess. Their collapse serves as a reminder of the power of humility, and their fractured narrative serves as a reminder that evil never wins. They continue to exist in the human imagination as silent reminders of the choice each heart has between corruption and light, rather than as monsters to be feared. It was said that during Noah's time the earth was overrun with corruption. There seemed to be violence everywhere, and people's hearts were growing more and more cut off from the voice of God. People married, feasted, and started families without considering the shadow looming over them, living as if tomorrow would never bring change. It was that the balance of life had been lost, not that happiness, marriage, or feasting were bad. Moderation was overtaken by desire, compassion was overtaken by greed, and justice was suppressed by power. The days passed in the typical rhythm of existence, but beneath it all was a void, a gradual breakdown of the sacred order. The purpose of the flood was to purge the invisible illness that had developed in people's hearts, as well as to wash away fleshly beings. It seems as though the echoes of that ancient era continue into our own. Today's world still exhibits the same patterns of imbalance despite its abundance of modernity and technology. There are enormous networks, tall buildings, and never-ending quests for knowledge, but these marvels are accompanied by equally profound shadows. Despite taking on new forms, violence continues to spread throughout communities and nations. Pride creates barriers between neighbors, and greed depletes resources more quickly than the planet can replenish them. Noah's days are not over. Rather, they have become a mirror reflecting our own, warning us of the perils of losing the rhythm of light and forgetting humility. According to the stories of Noah's time, people lived their lives oblivious to the impending storm. They didn't stop to consider how far they had strayed from harmony. This blindness itself contributed to the tragedy, because corruption rarely makes a big noise. Instead, it develops subtly and becomes accepted until people grow numb to it. The same silent threat still exists in the modern world. Even though there is a lot of noise and distraction around us, there is also silence, the silence of forgetting the voice that reminds us to regain our equilibrium and the silence of ignoring what really matters. We risk moving forward without realizing how precarious the ground has become, just as the people of Noah's day went on with their lives without stopping to think. Because it compels us to look inward rather than just outward, this comparison has a profoundly emotional quality. The inhabitants of Noah's time were not aliens from another world. Rather, they were regular people with families, dreams, and everyday hardships. They worked, they hoped, they loved, and they celebrated. Nevertheless, they permitted corruption to become commonplace in the middle of their everyday lives. Their story is so eerie because it explores the human heart and its ability to stray rather than just monsters or myths. People are still striving, celebrating, and creating futures in today's world. However, beneath the surface, the same drift, the same silent deterioration of compassion, and the same forgetfulness of the sacred are frequently present. The purpose of the Noah story is to provoke thought rather than fright. We are reminded of the value of awareness in the silence of its narration. Despite the corruption in his world, Noah is said to have maintained his sense of equilibrium and to have walked in harmony with God. In a sea of darkness, his life becomes a contrast, one man who chose light. Even in the face of ridicule or apathy, he is remembered as devoted, willing to listen, willing to act, and willing to live in a different way. The days of Noah serve as a mirror for us because of this contrast. There are people of all ages who follow the flow and others who, like Noah, opt for a more subdued, steady course. As it is remembered, the flood was a flood of rebirth as well as water. A moment of quiet, a purifying breath was given to the wave-covered world. The land appeared fresh and clean after the waters subsided, with the promise of a fresh start. For us now, that moment of rejuvenation is a component of the mirror. What would it look like to be renewed when we consider our own age, with all of its excesses and shadows? It is with the waters of the heart, the waters of humility, compassion, and peace, not with the waters that carry away cities. The narrative asks us to picture a flood of mercy, washing away the dust of indifference, a flood of justice, putting out the fires of violence, and a flood of kindness overpowering the dryness of pride. This reflection evokes strong feelings because it touches on the desire for harmony and balance that every soul has. Noah's days came to an end in silence, but hope was sown in that quiet. Many people today yearn for a calm that calms life's storms and a silence that renews. The ancient tale and the modern world meet in this desire. The mirror serves as a reminder of both the beauty of remembering and the peril of forgetting. Our decisions have the power to shine light through the darkness of our age, just as Noah's Ark did when it carried life through the seas. Every act of generosity turns into a plank in the ark, every instance of humility into a source of strength, and every act of faith into a vessel that can withstand the deluge of corruption that surrounds us. When we take into account that Noah's world was replete with voices of skepticism, the similarities become even more apparent. A flood seemed unthinkable, a story to be laughed at. We live in a world full of people who don't believe in things like water, but they also don't believe in the importance of balance, the sacred power, or the quiet path of humility. The noises become louder, telling us that power is the source of meaning, wealth is the source of value, and excess is the source of strength. The mirror, however, tells us otherwise. The timeless lesson of Noah's story is that obedience is the source of true strength, faithfulness is the source of true value, and walking gently with the light is the source of true meaning. When considering the analogy, it is also poignant to recall that Noah's story was about preservation as much as judgment. The purpose of the ark was to preserve life during the storm, not to destroy it. The ark in our own time is represented by decisions that uphold morality in a world that seems frail. Every soul has the capacity to become an ark, a container of compassion and kindness that holds the promise of rebirth for the days to come. Our hearts can find rest in becoming places where light is maintained even when shadows lengthen, just as the ark rested upon the waters. When viewed as a mirror of our own, Noah's times encourage introspection rather than hopelessness. They serve as a reminder that history is about more than just the past. It is also about recurring patterns, lessons learned, and decisions made. The story's emotional impact stems from its intimacy rather than its distance, from the knowledge that we are traveling paths that have already been traveled. Even though the flood is over, balance is still necessary. Therefore, when we look into the mirror of Noah's time, we see ourselves, our decisions, our desires, and our hope for a renewal that can purify not just the earth, but also the human heart. Like a soft echo that won't go away, the words found in Matthew 24 reverberate in the mind. The simple yet profound prophecy, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man, was delivered in a voice that aimed to awaken rather than frighten. It uses the recollection of earlier times when the seas rose and the world was unprepared as a mirror for the future. The verse only contains a comparison that is soft and eerie, as if it were whispered in a dream rather than a loud alarm, a storming trumpet or trembling ground. Nevertheless, the gentleness has a weight because it serves as a reminder that time is circular and that historical patterns could reappear in the quiet of the present. The passage talks about everyday life rather than thunder, giants, or floods. In Noah's time, people were eating, drinking, getting married, and giving in marriage, living as if today would be the same as tomorrow. Until the day the flood arrived and took them all away, life continued on with rhythm, laughter, labor, and song. The core of the prophecy is that silent indifference that prevents people from seeing the impending storm is often more dangerous than overt corruption or violent rebellion. It is the sleep of the spirit that passes through the days without noticing the signs etched in the sky, the blindness of living without awareness. These words are beautiful because they are silent. Instead of shouting doom, they encourage introspection and ask us to think about whether we are also blind. On the surface, Noah's days were characterized by normalcy rather than fear. Life appeared as safe as the rising sun as the fields were plowed, kids played, and wedding music filled the air. But something had changed beneath the surface. The divine's presence had been displaced, hearts were hardened by pride, and the ground itself was worn out by violence. Judgment was already coming in such silence, not with a clamor, but with inevitable arrival. The way twilight spreads over a landscape at the end of the day is like the silence that descends on the mind when you read Matthew 24. The words are serene but mysterious at the same time. They serve as a reminder that history has a way of repeating itself and that time has more layers than we can see. Humanity may once more be lulled into slumber, lost in the routines of everyday life and forgetting the eternal, as was the case with Noah. The prophecy calls for wakefulness rather than fear. It teaches us that the biggest risk is not always the storm itself, but rather the inability to recognize when the sky is getting darker for the rain starts. The reflection seems more personal in our day and age. Our days are also full of routines, work and relaxation, happiness and sadness, aspiration and hardship. These things have nothing wrong with them, but when they take up all of our attention, they can obscure our souls. We construct, strategize, and search, but frequently without stopping to consider whether a deeper current is at work beneath the surface. In this contemporary silence, Matthew 24's prophecy reminds us that we can live so near the edge of eternity and yet be ignorant. Its gentle yet firm tone exhorts us to remember the sacred significance of each day and not let it pass us by. Therefore, the shadow of the end times is one of forgetfulness rather than horror. It is the shadow that descends when humanity gets too caught up in its own beat to notice the gentle footsteps of eternity drawing near. According to the prophecy, the flood was not recognized by the people of Noah's time until it had already occurred. They had time, but because they were focused on the here and now, they did not perceive its urgency. This picture has a strong emotional resonance because it captures the human heart's propensity to hold on to the present while ignoring the future. In this description, we recognize ourselves as torn between the beauty of ordinary existence and the risk of losing sight of its frailty. However, there is also serenity in this contemplation. The prophecy is meant to reassure those who are on guard, not to frighten them. Because just as Noah found favor and constructed his ark, there are always souls who stay awake and walk in quiet faith, so the shadow of the end times does not descend upon everyone in despair. Even as the night grows darker, their lives continue to glow softly, like lanterns in the twilight. They are the ones who possess the confidence that floods cannot destroy the hope etched in the soul, and that storms cannot put out light. The threat of the end is lessened in their presence, and instead serves as a gentle reminder to maintain composure. The prophecy itself has an almost surreal tone. It describes life going on normally rather than terrifying visions or flaming catastrophes. Like a lullaby with truth in its melody, the tone is almost drowsy, as if the words are intended to slowly sink into the heart. And the beauty of its warning is hidden in this drowsy silence. Instead of startling us awake with fear, it gently nuzzles our minds, asking us to think, to observe, to be alert, even when we're going about our daily lives. It is the kind of silence that forces one to pause and pay closer attention, much like the silence of the evening before nightfall. People frequently picture chaos, fire, and upheaval when they hear the phrase "end times." However, Matthew 24 changes the emphasis. It informs us that the real sign lies not in chaos, but in complacency, and not in noise, but in silence. Without making an announcement, the shadow floats in like dusk, barely perceptible, until it envelops everything. However, there is still hope for light within that shadow, because just as Noah's Ark was ready long before the rain started, so too can the heart be ready by clinging to love and faith. The prophecy is more about the tenderness of readiness than it is about the fear of endings. Imagining this has a certain gentleness to it, as though the words themselves are intended to calm the soul and evoke contemplation. The drowsy tone is not by accident. It conveys the mood of a nighttime tale that is intended to both soothe and arouse deeper emotions. Even the stars themselves seem to echo the prophecy, reminding us that time is like a river and that the patterns of yesterday may one day flow into tomorrow. It is almost possible to imagine sitting under a starry sky and hearing the words repeated, "As it was in the days of Noah." Therefore, there is no need to be afraid when the end times shadow is mentioned. Yes, it is a shadow, but it also serves as a reminder of light. It is the silent contemplation of the fragility of life, the imminence of eternity, and the gift of awareness. The prophecy is an exhortation to walk carefully, to be vigilant, and to live with our hearts open so that when the days pass as they did in Noah's day, we won't be caught off guard and can instead stand erect, lanterns softly glowing, peacefully waiting for the dawn that follows the shadow. History is not just about the past. It's also about the past resurfacing in different guises. The ancient world described patterns that characterized Noah's time, times when humanity went beyond its bounds, when distinctions between human and non-human entities became hazy, and when the desire for power reached as high as the sky. Even though centuries have passed and the world has changed irrevocably, there is a subtle feeling that some of those patterns are resurfacing today, cloaked in science and technology rather than myth. What was once the creation of giants and odd unions in the past is now seen in labs, on bright screens, and in the dreams of people who aspire to transcend the limitations of the body. Technology is a gift that has extended, improved, and made life more comfortable. It is not inherently dangerous. However, within its advancement lies a whisper, a shadow of the same aspiration that inspired people in the beginning. The wish to transcend human limitations and rewrite creation's rules. That ancient reaching seems to be echoed in the rise of transhumanism, the idea that humans can combine with machines, improve their minds, and even avoid death. Perhaps new giants of human invention, with their immense intelligence and capacity, are walking the earth instead of the giants of old, changing the world in ways that previous generations could never have imagined. The concept of hybrids was originally associated with stories about angels and mortals, as well as Nephilim moving across the land in great strength. These days, hybrids are seen as genetic experiments that blend species and alter the codes of life itself, rather than as legendary creatures. Scientists talk about changing what it means to be human, eradicating weakness, and altering the very structure of DNA. In one way, these are miracles, actions that have the power to improve, heal, and restore lives. However, it also has an eerie quality because the old tales remind us that stepping over certain lines brought about misery rather than glory. Humanity runs the risk of repeating past mistakes in new and improved forms when it loses sight of its own frailty. The gentle warning is directed against the blindness that frequently accompanies power, not against knowledge or advancement. Creation was corrupted in Noah's time, not only by violence but also by the hubris of altering life without respect for its sanctity. The same spirit might be whispering in our world, telling us to go faster, to reach farther, to become something different from what we were created to be. Dreams of creating life that is neither entirely human nor entirely other, of pursuing immortality through machines, and of weaving consciousness into circuits all carry both beauty and peril. They remind us that every significant advancement must be made with humility, lest it reveal long-forgotten shadows, like a gentle melody fading through time. Thinking about this is tender because it is not a call to reject the gifts of progress, but rather to treat them with the same care that one would give to light in delicate glass. Today's technologies have the ability to feed the hungry, cure illnesses, and connect voices across oceans. However, they also carry with them the temptation to think that humanity can surpass the eternal and transcend its bounds without suffering any repercussions. This temptation is as old as the first tower to reach the sky and as old as the tales of people who aspired to become gods. Patterns return in spirit, clad in new garments, but not in their original form. Perhaps the giants of code, networks, and machines that get stronger with each electrical heartbeat have replaced the giants of flesh. During the silent hours of the night, one might question whether the merging of human and machine reflects the hazy lines of those earlier eras. These dreams stir with both promise and anxiety, to upload the mind into circuits, to fuse steel and bone, to produce children whose genes are designed rather than inherited. They challenge us to consider what it means to be human, and whether we risk losing our true selves in the process of trying to go beyond our limitations. The warning is mild, not a cry of terror, but a whisper of remembering, like the faint echo of an old tale, that when people lose sight of the beauty of their own creation, they run the risk of following paths that lead to darkness rather than light. However, despair is unnecessary even in these contemplations. Ancient patterns do not necessarily portend impending disaster. It simply indicates that, as in earlier times, humanity finds itself at a crossroads once more. The choices are different, the tools are more complicated, but the fundamental question is still the same. Should one walk in humility or with pride, treat life as sacred or like clay in one's own hands? These are timeless questions that still have the same weight when posed in the quiet before the flood, even though they are now expressed in the language of science and technology. These thoughts are surrounded by a serene atmosphere of contemplation rather than panic. Knowing that every wave carries both beauty and power is like watching waves gently rise upon a shore. Like the sea, technology can carry away those who forget its power, but it can also be a wave that lifts humanity to new heights. Thinking about transhumanism and flesh-machine hybrids is like standing at the water's edge and paying close attention to the tide's rhythm. It contains music, but it also serves as a reminder that the fate of those who live on the land has always been influenced by the tides. There is wonder at what has been accomplished, and the world is resonating with voices that promise unending progress. Once incurable diseases can now be cured, previously insurmountable distances can now be traversed in a split second, and previously hidden knowledge is now accessible to anyone who seeks it. These are wonders to be honored. However, it's important to keep in mind that not everything that can be done ought to be done. It is not always wise to follow a path just because it is feasible. The balance that the ancients overlooked is the one that speaks to us in our day and age once more. The reappearance of old patterns ultimately seems less like a curse and more like a silent reminder, a mirror preserved through the ages. It demonstrates how humanity has always struggled with the urge to become more, to go beyond its own bounds, and to blur the boundaries of what was given. The only difference is form. Machines, networks, and codes of life have replaced the giants of legend. The necessity of humility, reverence, and the understanding that life is a gift that should not be carelessly rewritten are constants. The warning is mild, like the wind before rain, and it encourages us to keep our eyes open rather than reject progress. It reminds us that not all boundaries should be crossed and that the human heart has the capacity to both build and pause. Numerous voices have told, retold, questioned, and reshaped the giant's story over the centuries, each contributing layers of thought to what was initially a straightforward tale of wonder and mystery. These stories are viewed by contempo, rare academics, interpreters, and truth-seekers not just as myths or legends, but also as windows into the human predicament with regard to memory, meaning, and the unknown. Their voices combine to create a patchwork of viewpoints, with some focusing on history, others on symbolism, and still others on the spiritual significance of these tales. Listening to them makes it easier to see the questions that still loom large in our current world in addition to the giants of the past. Biblical scholars frequently examine the Nephilim through the meticulous prism of ancient languages. They try to determine whether the word refers to fallen ones, mighty ones, or something else entirely by looking at Hebrew roots, Aramaic translations, and Greek fragments. These academics view the giants as figures that exemplify mystery in words, rather than just as impossibly large physical entities. They inquire as to whether the Nephilim were merely famous men who were remembered for their size and strength, or if they were the children of gods and humans. The discussion focuses more on how language transmits meaning shadows from generation to generation than it does on monsters roaming the earth. In turn, historians situate the giants in the framework of prehistoric mythology. According to them, the Nephilim are echoes of myths that are common to many cultures, tales of creatures that stood between heaven and earth and represented the union of divine intervention and human ambition. They draw comparisons between the biblical giants and the strange creatures carved on ancient stones, the heroes of Mesopotamia, and the titans of Greek myth. These interpreters see the giant's story as a part of a larger human desire to give names to the forces of chaos, explain the extraordinary, and represent in legend the results of pride and desire. Their voices serve as a reminder that myths are more than just fantastical. They are windows into the most profound anxieties and aspirations of societies. On the other hand, the question of whether giants actually walked the earth is frequently ignored by theologians. They examine the story's implications for morality, faith, and the human condition. Some people view the Nephilim as a symbol of creation's corruption, of what occurs when the divinely established boundaries are crossed. They interpret the giants as a cautionary tale about excess and the blending of things that should have remained distinct. Others, on the other hand, take a more gentle approach to the tale, speculating that the giants might represent not just corruption, but also the overwhelming weight of human violence and conceit that pervaded the planet prior to the deluge. The giants' voices serve as a reminder of the precarious equilibrium between light and dark, as well as beings from the past and the shadows of human decisions. Despite their tendency to be cautious, archaeologists occasionally join the discussion out of curiosity. Even though the majority of the discoveries are within the typical range of human history, the fascination of the extraordinary endures as they unearth enormous ruins, ancient cities, and bones whose size arouses the imagination. Some scholars investigate whether the discovery of fossilized remains of large creatures, which were once thought to be proof of beings too large for the human frame, may have served as the inspiration for the stories of giants. Others speculate that the myth of a race of giants may have been based on tall people who are remembered orally. Their dust and stone reflections serve as a reminder that, when magnified by the echo of centuries, legends can emerge from seemingly insignificant facts. These days, voices outside of academia also add to the discussion. The giants are woven into new stories by authors, filmmakers, and storytellers who combine bits of ancient lore with their own imagination. Hey, see the Nephilim as rich symbols of the struggle between good and evil, heaven and earth, humility and pride, rather than just historical issues. Even though these retellings don't adhere to the meticulous scholarly threads, they manage to captivate audiences who are still drawn to the mystery. The giants serve as living metaphors for today's struggles rather than merely historical figures, serving as a reminder that myth has meaning and power beyond memory. Additionally, there are the voices of spiritual seekers who quietly listen to the story in hopes of learning lessons that will help them on their own journey. Some people believe that the Nephilim represent the perils of losing sight of the sacred and letting ambition triumph over humility. Others see them as symbols of the weight of humanity, massive internal and external obstacles that need to be overcome with bravery and faith. These interpretations find a lantern that continues to shine for those who walk in uncertainty in the ancient tale, focusing more on wisdom than proof. The striking thing about all of these viewpoints is how different and yet similar they are. The giants are viewed as historical figures by some, mythical by others, and still symbolic by others. However, every voice adds to a tapestry that focuses more on exploring the mystery than on solving it. In many respects, the Nephilim are still unsolved, and it is precisely this uncertainty that lends them their enduring influence. A story that is fully revealed loses some of its impact, but one that is only partially revealed encourages contemplation. There is room for imagination, faith, and wonder because of the missing details, the broken pages, and the uncertainty of translation. There is a gentle invitation for anyone listening to contemporary voices on the giants to stop and think about what the giants were and what they mean. Are these shadows of human pride? Or were they creatures of flesh and bone? Were they signs of difficulties too great to overcome on one's own? Or were they cautionary tales of what occurs when creation is warped? Every interpretation contains a fragment of the truth, and by considering them, we are able to face not only the giants of history, but also the giants inside ourselves. The anxieties, aspirations, and questions that are greater than we can readily handle. Like listening to numerous voices around a fire, each offering their thoughts before fading into silence, the reflection is supposed to be soothing rather than frightening. While some voices are soft and only express wonder, others are firm and declare certainty. When combined, they produce a harmony of ideas that promotes slow meditation rather than hasty decisions. In this balance, the giants become less about fear of the unknown and more about mystery, less about terror and more about the beauty of a tale that never goes out of style. Thus, the dialogue goes on, with contemporary voices rising and falling while bringing the echoes of the past with them. They coexist, like different notes in a single song rather than silencing one another. The reason the Nephilim are still a mystery is not because no one has spoken, but rather because so many people have spoken in a variety of ways, keeping the narrative alive and suspenseful. These voices give the reader, listener, or dreamer an opportunity to not only learn, but also to think, to see a mirror that remains upright in the giant's story, silently asking what we believe and why the questions persist long after the giant's own footsteps have faded. The world seems to be trapped between the present and the future, as though time itself has slowed into a silent breath. During these times, visions of the end are gentle rather than harsh or thunderous, as if they were caught in a dream where meaning floats just out of reach and image, as blend together. In addition to serving as warnings, the ancient texts describe apocalyptic visions as spiritual landscapes, places where the mundane vanishes and something enormous and unearthly emerges. Like clouds in a dusk sky, these visions float through memory, eerie yet oddly serene, full of wonder and weight. The prophets frequently used language that reads more like poetry than history to explain what they witnessed. They described seas that roared as if roused by unseen hands, of skies ripped open, and of stars falling like dying embers. But even in their fear, there is beauty, a timeless beauty, as if the end of the world were not just destruction, but the unveiling of something long concealed. One can practically picture a horizon drenched in previously unimaginable hues in their words, a quivering sky that appears both serene and frightening. It seems like a final canvas stretched across eternity is being used to paint the world anew. Imagine traversing such a vision. Though altered, the earth is familiar. As if listening to the tremor of the heavens, the trees stand silently, their branches reaching upward. A sky full of strange signs is reflected by the slow, luminous gleam of rivers. Cities in the distance seem to vanish, their towers melting into darkness and light, leaving behind nothing but the echo of the past. This dreamscape is filled with a profound stillness rather than chaos, as if creation itself has stopped to await the turning of the last page. These visions contain faint trumpet sounds that resonate deeply within the heart, but are not audible to the naked ear. Instead of breaking the stillness, they flow through it in a gentle manner, resembling ripples in water that gradually spread out until they reach every shore. According to the prophets, these noises were signs of impending change and the end of time. The trumpets sound less like, or dirrs to those who hear them in dreams, and more like calls to wake up, pay attention, and realize that the world as it is now is not the world that will be. Fire, though not always the fire of destruction, is a common element in apocalyptic imagery. Occasionally it is the fire of refinement, blazing like embers that purify instead of devour. The hidden areas of the heart are illuminated by softly dancing flames in these visions. In the midst of this fire, mountains seem to be glowing with an unearthly radiance rather than collapsing, as if something long anticipated is finally going to surface. The earth below feels alive and trembles, not in fear, but in anticipation. As a promise that there is a brighter light beyond the darkness, the apocalyptic fire transforms from a punishment into a purifying dawn. Paradoxes are frequently present in dreamlike visions. The land is covered in darkness, but it is a mystery rather than a darkness of despair. Stars disappear from the sky, but strange, new lights emerge that lead through the unknown like lanterns. Oceans rise, but the gentle rhythm of their waves is like a lullaby to the earth. There is a gentleness even in pictures of collapse, as if the world is gently folding itself into a new beginning rather than exploding with a scream. The prophets also described unseen hands unfolding scrolls and opening books. These scrolls float in the dreamlike imagination like wind-blown leaves. Words, known and unknown, written and unwritten, seem to shimmer on every page. It feels purposeful rather than hurried as these scrolls are unfolded, as though time is being read aloud, each moment is being recorded, and each secret is being disclosed. When a dreamer sees this scene, they feel small and cherished, as if their life is just one of many stories that are meticulously preserved in a cosmic memory. These apocalyptic visions frequently feature figures, messengers shrouded in luminous light, voices that speak with a composed authority that is impossible to ignore without shouting. They move, gracefully rather than hurriedly, serving as a reminder that the events that transpire are not the result of random chance, but rather of a long-standing pattern. Like seeds waiting to sprout, their few and frequently straightforward words linger in the heart. These figures remind the listener that the end is not erasure, but transformation, not abandonment, but transition, in the dreamlike silence of the end times. These gentle visions frequently evoke images of a new earth and a new heaven. Picture a sky that has been cleansed, as if all the tears and shadows have been removed. Imagine a landscape that has been revitalized, where rivers sculpt roots through formerly desolate areas, where the deserts bloom and where all living things can breathe fearlessly. This vision transforms the brokenness of the past into something whole, redeeming it rather than erasing it. As the dreamer moves through this made-up world, The burden of grief is lifted, and in its place is an unwavering calm that seems to hum in every leaf and stone. When envisioned gently, even the end of time feels more like completion than loss. The apocalypse carries a sense of fulfillment, as if every story, every struggle, and every longing has finally found its place, like a symphony reaching its final note. The final visions turn into lullabies rather than nightmares. They are strange and eerie, to be sure, but they also have a beauty that both reassures and unnerves. When a dreamer enters such a vision, they awaken not in terror but in silent wonder, as if they have been moved by something inexplicable. Therefore, the apocalyptic visions continue to exist, both as sobering warnings in sacred texts and as thought-provoking dreamscapes. They are about more than just collapse. They are about revelation, not just destruction. When seen through the prism of mystery, the imagery, with all its fire, trumpets, and quivering skies, becomes softer, like a dream that fades at dawn but leaves a feeling of wonder in its wake. By doing this, the apocalypse is transformed from an end in and of itself into a passage, a dreamlike page turning in which vision and silence blend together, and the world itself exhales in gentle surrender to what is beyond. There is a huge, weightless area where words seem to vanish before they are even spoken, where the cacophony of human voices subsides and nothing but silence is left. Although it feels like an emptiness at first, it is not. It is a fullness that is too deep and too wide to quantify, as if silence were the language of something bigger. There is a pause between heaven and earth, a long, soft breath that lingers like dawn before the sun rises. Entering this silence means letting go of the need to explain, allowing thoughts to wander and choosing to feel rather than talk. As though it were the curtain separating the visible from the invisible, the ancients occasionally used reverent language when discussing this silence. It is the quiet that falls before something significant happens, not the silence of absence, but of waiting. In that silence, one can picture the entirety of creation leaning forward, listening, waiting, and yet resting. Rivers flow steadily, mountains remain motionless, and stars burn silently above. Everything appears to be in its right place in that silence, which is a harmony of balance rather than noise. Time seems to relax when one is in such a state of stillness. The minutes do not chase each other, the hours do not rush forward. Rather, it feels like an unending, leisurely circle where each moment flows into the next like ripples on a placid lake. The past does not hold on here between heaven and earth, and the future does not demand. As if eternity itself were compressed into a single breath, there is only the present, wide and alive. Our burdens start to lighten in such quiet, the sound of fear, the burden of regret, and the never-ending roiling of desire all seem to fade into the background. They shrink against the immensity of the silence, not that they disappear. They are no longer able to overwhelm. All other things become minor, controllable, and softer in the presence of silence, which neither condemns nor commands. One starts to realize that even grief has a role here, albeit a gentle note in a greater song of existence rather than as an agony. This quiet can occasionally feel like a threshold, as if one were standing between two different worlds. The earth, with its restlessness, its noise, its never-ending pursuit, is behind. Something unknowable, limitless, and beyond human comprehension exists before. To linger on that threshold is to experience both peace and longing. Peace in merely remaining motionless for a while, and longing for what is beyond. It is a place that offers everything without asking. Peace, clarity, and the tiniest hint of eternity drawing near. Imagine entering a vast desert at dusk, when the wind has stopped and the air appears to be holding its breath. In the waning light, the golden sand turns to silver as it spreads out in all directions, and above it, the first stars appear softly. Your own slow steps are the only movement, and the only sound is your own heartbeat. Even though there is a great deal of silence here, it does not oppress you. It envelops you, holds you, and gives you a sense of alive stillness. It is in these situations that one realizes the power of silence over spoken words. It's not always an external silence between heaven and earth. It occasionally blossoms inside the soul. It is experienced when the mind stops circling restlessly and thoughts fold inward like wings at rest instead of dispersing in all directions. A deeper voice that speaks not in words, but rather through impressions, gentle prods, and an awareness that feels more like remembering than learning can be found in that inner silence. Recalling what has always been true and what has always been waiting beneath life's cacophony is what it means to sit in that silence. Ancient literature describes times when silence reigned before the revelation of great mysteries, and heaven itself appeared to pause. It is said that before the final judgments were revealed, the heavenly courts were silent for 30 minutes. As if the weight of eternity demands reverence before the next act begins, such passages imply that silence holds authority even in the realm of the divine. Silence transforms into ceremony as well as absence, the holy silence preceding revelation. One might question whether silence was the source of creation itself. Was there not a great silence, a void that awaited filling before the first word was spoken, before light broke through the darkness? If this is the case, silence is the mother of sound, the canvas on which life is painted, rather than just its background. Therefore, to enter silence is to go back to the beginning, to re-enter the space from which everything originated. It's a quiet, introspective sort of homecoming. The pauses in our own lives are reflected in the pause between heaven and earth. There are moments when nothing seems to be moving forward, when everything seems to stop, and when progress slows down. These times are disconcerting, as if we are hovering in mid-air, unable to go back to the past, but also unable to enter the future. But maybe these pauses serve as reminders that stillness has a purpose, invitations, or echoes of that larger silence. Something inside of us has the opportunity to calm down, align, and breathe while we wait. In this sense, silence is fullness rather than emptiness, the deepest form of meaning rather than its absence. It is the place where the soul can finally rest and the heart can finally hear. It contains a tenderness and a vastness that words and thoughts cannot express, a place where the gap between the divine and the human feels less, as if one could reach across the veil and touch eternity with the quiet of their being. The silence between heaven and earth is not a place to be feared, but rather a haven to enter. One starts to understand that silence is not lonely, but rather companionable when they linger in such stillness. Though invisible, it is brimming with presence. Even though no sound is produced, it is alive with echoes. And in its tender embrace, the tired soul finds rest, the restless heart finds peace, and the searching mind discovers that it doesn't always have to search. Because there is already enough in the quiet between heaven and earth. Peace has already been established. The giant's tale is not just about their size and strength. It also explores what happens when greatness is tainted, when pride uses strength as a weapon, and when desire triumphs over humility. Despite their great height and unrivaled power, they collapsed. And in their fall, there is a silent mirror for all of us. An unspoken reminder that no matter how far one climbs, the decisions made in the heart will always determine the soul's fate. Yes, their story is tragic, but it also contains profound lessons, moral lessons that are subtly woven into the fabric of long-forgotten memory. To observe their demise is to observe the corruption that results from unbridled power. Beauty, wisdom, and strength are not inherently bad. However, these gifts turn into conceit and greed when they are coveted possessions. The giants appeared to have forgotten that life is a gift and that they did not create the breath they drew. They lost the very equilibrium that had kept them going as they snatched at more, ravening for what was out of their grasp. Their fall serves as a gentle reminder to us that humility, kindness, and the capacity to remember the origin of everything are the true measures of greatness rather than height, wealth, or power. We are reminded of how brittle the distinction between light and shadow is by their rebellion. Born of odd unions, the giants carried both distortion and brilliance. They had the capacity for wonder, but they tended toward destruction. They teach us that every human heart, regardless of talent, faces the same decision every day, whether to follow the path of virtue or to let pride lead the way. Though their memory also illuminates the way to humility, their shadow still looms as a warning. We are gently led back to what preserves life rather than destroys it as we witness what happens when light is abandoned in their fall. The silence that ensued after them also teaches a lesson. The world was quieter after they fell, and the scars of their violence were erased by the waters. This quiet conveys a sense of rebirth, a second chance for creation, and the divine's gentle tolerance of humanity's weakness. We are reminded that there is always a chance for reconciliation and restoration, even in cases where corruption spreads. Even though the giants had fallen, life went on, and a fresh start emerged from the ashes of their memories. We learn what it means to forget boundaries from the giants. Living as if boundaries didn't exist, they were motivated by desire without self-control and crossed lines that shouldn't have been crossed. Their demise serves as a reminder that boundaries are safeguards rather than prisons. Like a river's banks that permit water to flow forcefully rather than overflowing into chaos, boundaries are gifts. When boundaries are respected, life thrives. When they are disregarded, destruction results. As a result, their tale ceases to be one of terror and instead becomes a silent lesson in respect for life, for one another, and for the invisible laws that underpin creation. The reminder of how ephemeral pride really is arguably one of the most important lessons they impart to us. The giants were powerless to stop the wave of judgment, no matter how strong they were. Once uttered in awe, their names have since faded into the past. Pride creates lofty structures, but they always collapse. The subtle truth here is that humility endures even if it seems insignificant to others. Humility is what brings us closer to peace and lays roots strong enough to withstand storms. Even though the fall of the giants is tragic, it leaves a whispering voice that reminds us to live more modestly, to walk softer, and to keep in mind that all greatness fades without goodness at its core. Realizing that even their failure is not in vain is also tender. For those who are willing to listen, wisdom emerges from their ruin and understanding from their story. It's as if their brokenness served as both a lesson and a means of allowing others to grow without making the same mistakes. This demonstrates how even darkness can lead to light, and how even the lost can lead to the discovery of others. Their downfall serves as a reminder that no life is beyond redemption if its tale can guide another soul, and it is written with quiet mercy rather than rage. On closer inspection, their demise also shows how readily the fascination with power can capture the human heart. In addition to being destroyed, the giants are remembered for appearing larger than life. Their mystery, strength, and size all arouse the imagination. Nevertheless, their story's beauty is found in their downfall rather than in their strength. When one sees the emptiness underneath it and understands that strength without wisdom is a thin shell that is easily broken, the fascination wanes. Another gentle lesson can be learned from this realization. What shines is not always what lasts, and what endures is frequently found in simpler, more subdued settings. Compassion is also wove, and with the moral strands of their fall. Their story invites understanding, even as it cautions. They were creatures caught in a conflict between their intended and desired selves, not monsters as later stories might portray them. They lost that battle. Nevertheless, we can recognize ourselves in them, the same frailty, the same temptations, the same need for grace. Because stumbling is a natural part of the human journey, their fall encourages us to be gentle with those who stumble as well as to fear pride. When they extract the last lesson from their memory, that everything that is not based in love eventually falls apart, there is a profound silence. Pride, desire, violence, and greed all rise loudly, but soon fall away. Quiet and frequently invisible, love endures. The story of the giant's demise illustrates what happens when selfishness overrides love. For those who pay close attention, however, it becomes an exhortation to cling to the timeless. Not fame, not height, not power, but the silent power of peace, love, and humility. These are the things that endure and are impervious to fall. As a result, their tale lives on in the past as a somber reminder and a beacon of hope. Their ascent and descent left a path of wisdom etched not in victory, but in failure, not in strength, but in the breakdown of abused strength. Walking away from their story means carrying a gentle awareness that the journey is defined by the posture of the heart, regardless of how high we reach. Their fall serves as our mirror, and if we are willing to look gently, we can find the way to live gently, walk humbly, and rest in the unfading peace. The tale of the giants is no longer confined to dusty scraps of parchment or the pages of antiquated memory. It finds its way into the ears of every new generation as it travels through time like a soft echo, and their story becomes more than just a story. It becomes a gentle warning for us who live in a time full of our own wonders and perils. It is a gentle voice that invites introspection and reminds us that the decisions we made yesterday still influence our decisions today, rather than a loud warning that makes people shudder. Their ascent and decline are interwoven with the history of humanity, serving as both guidance and a gentle warning that reverberates through the ages. Their story reveals a pattern that is familiar to us. The giants lived in an era when the humility of having enough started to give way to the desire for more. They aimed for influence, power, and the erasure of boundaries. The same spirit of excess persists in contemporary life, even though there are no giants marching across the landscape in our world. It is evident in the restless quest for prestige, the never-ending desire for wealth, and the ways that knowledge and technology are occasionally overextended. Their tale subtly challenges us to think about not just what we can accomplish, but also what we ought to do with the authority we possess. Today's gentle warning is one of awareness rather than censure. Bridges of science, tall buildings, and machines that can travel beyond the stars are just a few of the accomplishments of our time. Although these things are not inherently bad, they share the same temptation that the giants did, the temptation to lose sight of humility. Their fall serves as a reminder that when power is unbalanced, it can be destructive. When wisdom is devoid of compassion, it can become cold, and when progress is made without contemplation, it can quickly degenerate into disaster. It encourages us to proceed cautiously and to steady our progress without allowing it to supplant the more fundamental principles that uphold human life, such as justice, kindness, and respect for the sacred. When the warning is interpreted as guidance rather than a threat, it has a certain sweetness. The memory of the giants encourages us to pay close attention to the roads we travel, much like a parent gently tells a child to check both directions before crossing the street. The paths of pride and ambition may appear clear, but if we lose sight of the basic beauty of humility, they are paved with darkness. Like a lantern placed along a dark path to help us avoid stumbling where they stumbled, their downfall is told to protect us rather than to frighten us. It is an invitation to awaken in a state of gentle mindfulness rather than panic. The reminder of boundaries is one of the poignant realities concealed within their tale. The giants crossed lines intended for safety in an attempt to go beyond what was provided. This serves as a gentle reminder for today that boundaries are meant to serve as guidelines rather than as prisons. Comparatively speaking, we are not meant to live a life of constant consumption and the need to be more. Setting boundaries makes room for calm, thankfulness, and relaxation. The tale of the giants encourages us to embrace the silent wisdom of boundaries in the fast-paced world we live in, where there seems to be constant noise and demands. It teaches us that happiness comes from respecting the rhythms of life that were written long before us, not from crossing every line. Even in the darkest moments of their story, hope endures. The story went on with renewal even though their world ended in silence and flood. That renewal is a promise in and of itself, that there is always room for a new beginning, even in the face of corruption and pride. This turns into a message of hope for us, that no matter how dire things seem or how far society seems to have fallen, there is always hope for a return or a chance to rebuild with kinder hands. The fall of the giants was not the end of the world. Rather, it marked the start of something new, and this same pattern is subtly present in our modern world. The caution for the present era also serves as a reminder to keep in mind the harmony between our inner light and dark. The giants had both potential and danger in them. They were not entirely one or the other. We also do. Our daily decisions, such as whether to be patient, forgive, or use our gifts for good or harm, influence how our lives and the lives of people around us turn out. Instead of condemning us to the same fate, the tale of their downfall offers us the opportunity to make a different decision. It teaches us that we have the capacity to walk with humility, to choose peace over violence, and to build a world that is more inclined toward light. This story can be used as a meditation in the evening when the day's noise has subsided. Imagine the hush that followed the fall of those ancient creatures, so powerful and arrogant. Not only is that silence depressing, but it is also educational. It teaches us that the gentle persistence of what is good, rather than the roar of greatness, is what endures. For us, this means learning to appreciate the small things, like the love given even when it goes unnoticed, the patience displayed in trying times, or the kindness shown to a stranger. These are the enduring pillars that transcend time itself, the real giants of our world. Our relationship with each other is also touched upon in the gentle warning. The giants' way of life was one of dominance, violence, and contempt for the weak. We are encouraged to walk differently by their story. The story of their fall becomes a gentle call to unity, compassion, and choosing empathy over judgment in our contemporary world, where division and conflict seem to rise like storms. It serves as a reminder that real strength comes from supporting others, preserving what is weak, and mending what is damaged rather than from subduing them. It teaches us that we don't have to make the same mistakes they did if we choose to be kind. The tender truth that life is sacred lies at the core of the warning. The giants ignored this, viewing the world as something they could control, eat, and shape however they pleased. We also run the risk of forgetting, particularly in a society where success, money, and speed are frequently used to gauge value. Their tale makes us stop and remind us that life should be cherished rather than used. The people who live with us, the water that sustains us, and the air we breathe are all gifts, not things. The fall of the giants serves as a reminder that peace arises when we respect life, and that destruction results when we disregard its sanctity. Therefore, the story is presented to us subtly, like a gentle breeze at dusk rather than as thunder roaring across the sky. It awakens but does not frighten. It calls on us to walk in humility, to guard against arrogance, to embrace the wisdom of boundaries, and to recognize the opportunity to choose love over destruction at every turn. Yes, it is a warning, but it is also laced with optimism. It teaches us that we are not obligated to repeat past actions and that we have the power to create a new path that is characterized by peaceful, gentle walking rather than falling giants. At times, the tales of the past appear burdensome, burdened with the specters of condemnation, grief, and loss. There is so much weight in the story of the giants, their arrogance and their demise. But even in the darkest stories, a faint but persistent glimmer of light shines through. The narrative does not conclude with devastation. Rather, it contains the promise that light will never be completely engulfed by darkness, the whisper of mercy, and the seed of rebirth. This timeless truth meets us where we are, providing consolation, healing, and the assurance. See that there is still calm beyond the storm, and that there is still dawn beyond the night. These old stories contain a subtle yet potent sense of mercy. The act of saving life itself turned into a compassionate deed, even as Noah's world was subjected to overwhelming judgment. Mercy was present even during a time of immense sorrow, as evidenced by the promise of continuity after chaos, the gathering of creatures 2 by 2, and the preservation of a single family. Our own lives follow the same pattern. Mercy silently supports us and gives us the strength to start over when everything feels heavy, the world seems broken, or our personal burdens seem too heavy. It gives us the opportunity to gently rise from the ruins and move forward into new light. But it does not erase what has already happened. Because it reminds us that endings are never the whole story. This message is calming. There was still hope, even though the giants had fallen and the floodwaters had risen. Where despair had threatened to linger, renewal had begun. The restless human heart is soothed by that gentle truth. Loss, regret, conflict, and failure are all part of life, but they don't fully capture the whole picture. Hope itself implies that darkness is transient, a veil that can be lifted rather than a permanent prison. Just as the rainbow appeared after the storm, an enduring symbol of mercy and a promise of peace, there is hope for healing in every broken moment. Light feels deeper and softer when it emerges after a long night than when it shines during the day. Similarly, there is no sweetness like the mercy that comes after sorrow. It teaches us to appreciate the small pleasures that we might otherwise take for granted, and to see with kinder eyes. The sound of running water, the warmth of sunlight on the skin, and the breath of fresh air all serve as reminders that life is still precious. And, in the care of a hand bigger than our own, the ancient giants may represent corruption and destruction, but what emerges from their tale is not only judgment, but also the gentle hand of rebirth. This hand extends into the present and through time, giving us the same reassuring certainty that light will always come back, no matter how dark the night grows. Mercy is beautiful because it does not require perfection. Noah's story shows that he was chosen because of his faithfulness rather than because he was perfect. This serves as a reminder that receiving mercy does not necessitate being faultless. It accepts us for who we are, covering our flaws with empathy and serving as a reminder that everyone is loved. Perhaps the story's most consoling message is that hope is available to everyone who turns their heart toward it, not just the strong or the pure. Every listener can rest in this because it reassures us that nothing is out of the light's reach. Beyond darkness, hope is both a present reality that subtly influences our days and a far-off promise. Remembering that mercy still flows can calm the spirit like a serene river during times when we feel lost, when anxiety approaches, or when despair whispers its lies. It enables us to walk through challenges without giving in to them, breathe more deeply, and trust more completely. Our hardships can serve as sites for development, healing, and rebirth, much like the flood did not wipe out humanity, but rather served as the foundation for a new world. This truth's universality is what gives it its emotional depth. Everyone has experienced the sting of brokenness, the weight of regret, or the taste of sadness. However, everyone is also welcome to experience the tenderness of being raised after falling and the sweetness of restoration. This is a rhythm that permeates our own lives and is not just a tale from antiquity. The mercy that steadily flows through time is not greater than the darkness we face today. Whether it be personal or collective, light continues to pierce our shadows, just as it did when it first broke through floodwaters, reminding us that humanity's history is one of enduring grace rather than unending decline. Love is also closely related to the story of hope, because what is mercy but love that goes beyond what is rightfully yours? Even though the giants represent rebellion and corruption, their demise allows for the revelation of mercy. This paradox gives us comfort because it reassures us that love is present even in the most difficult times. It lurks in the background, waiting to come to the surface in healing, rebirth, and the soft dawn of a new day. Darkness never has the last say because of love. It is what transforms silence into song, grief into strength, and endings into beginnings. As we sit with these thoughts, the giant's story's gentle warning shifts from one of fear to one of encouragement. Their fall serves as both a backdrop for mercy to shine and a story of judgment. It reminds us that while pride and corruption are real threats, compassion is more resilient and endures even in the face of apparent devastation. This serves as an invitation for us to live in hope rather than despair, to show mercy in our personal interactions, and to be light bearers in a world that frequently seems to be burdened by darkness. This story provides emotional solace akin to a warm blanket on a chilly evening. It protects and warms us from the cold, but it does not deny it. Although the story admits the darkness, it doesn't stop there. Rather, it gently guides us toward light, toward the assurance that forgiveness is greater than failure, and that loss is always followed by renewal. The rainbow in the sky after the flood is still the ideal representation of this reality. It shows that beauty and hope can arise even in the midst of the worst storm. Hope beyond darkness is a tale of transformation as much as survival. It teaches us that the burden of darkness can increase our gratitude for the light of day, and that suffering can increase our capacity for happiness. Peace comes from remembering mercy, and strength comes from embracing light. No matter how difficult it may seem, our own journey has a glimmer of hope, just as the old tale did. Even in the darkest night, the promise is unwavering. Mercy will always find us, and light will always rise. Only by gently circling it, like footsteps on grass at night, and being cautious not to wake what lies beneath the stars, can words achieve a certain kind of stillness. When all striving is put aside, when the burdens that weighed heavily during the day are gently placed down, and when the spirit falls into a peaceful slumber, it is the stillness of the soul at peace. Think of the soul as a child in protective arms, falling asleep fearlessly, breathing steadily and deeply, and being surrounded by a loving presence that keeps watch over it. Time relaxes in this area, and even memory becomes quiet, as if eternity itself is leaning in to protect the sleeping heart. This soul's sleep is neither absence nor forgetfulness. It is a pause that contains the entirety of existence, much like how night envelops the earth without destroying it. The soul is neither lost nor diminished during this rest. Rather, it is merely permitted to breathe in peace and quiet, free from the clamor and disturbance that frequently permeate the hours of waking. It is similar to lying next to a still river, with the water flowing by in silvery threads in the moonlight and the gentle sound of leaves rustling in time with one's own heartbeat. The world goes on, but there is a different rhythm, one that is deeper, slower, and unaffected by urgency in the soul. This sleep can be thought of as a gentle riat into the innermost sanctuary where danger cannot come. The difficulties, the anxieties, and the never-ending questions stay outside the doorway. The soul rests here, enveloped in tranquility, as though it were wearing a garment made of light and silence. Every wound is comforted, every pain is held, and every tear is recalled but silently healed. The soul's sleep is like having invisible hands carry you through the night on a love that doesn't need words. The way the soul reflects the natural cycle while at rest is incredibly beautiful. The soul has its moments of surrender, just as the day turns into night, the bloom into fading, and the tide into retreat. These times are not endings, but rather beginnings. They are places where light is maintained, strength is gathered, and clarity is born. The vastness of the heavens stretched above as a protective veil, and to imagine the soul sleeping is to see it lying beneath a canopy of stars. Every sparkling light in the sky seems to be telling the sleeping soul that it is not forgotten, and that its silence is a part of the harmony of creation rather than emptiness. There is a sweetness to the picture of the soul sleeping that is reminiscent of release. It seems as though the fears that grip us during the day gradually relax and fall away one by one. It is no longer necessary to respond to thoughts. No longer do regrets gnaw at the corners of memory. Even the yearning for the past becomes softer, like a faraway tune that lingers as a loving echo rather than causing pain. The soul tastes something beyond grief during such a sleep, an unending serenity where even shadows relax and become less angular. The idea that the soul has a separate place to rest from the body, as if the most profound aspect of who we are is not constantly enmeshed in the daily grind, is consoling. This inward rest turns into a storm-proof haven when the outside world is agitated and the heart is burdened. There is no striving, no judgment, and no unresolved business in this inner sleep. All that exists is a steady, gentle rhythm of existence, akin to the waves of the ocean rising and falling without hurry. Even if the body continues to wander, it is a place where the soul remembers its true home. In order to describe it, one must rely on imagery that conveys both tenderness and eternity. Imagine the soul settling into a nest high in the branches, out of the reach of any predator, like a dove folding its wings, or like the steady, silent, and invisible flame of a lamp set inside a shelter, or a song that has been passed down through the ages to soothe every restless heart, like a child being soothed by a lullaby older than the world. These pictures serve as a reminder that the soul's sleep is not a place of abandonment, but rather one of care and sanctuary. An intimacy that feels beyond words can be found in the deeper layers of such rest. When the soul is sleeping, it appears to be closest to the eternal, grazing the edges of selfless love. The soul is rejuvenated and healed in ways that the mind cannot understand right here in this quiet rest. It soothes wounds that no treatment could completely heal. Silently, burdens that no hand could lift are lifted. Beneath the surface of everyday life, the soul's sleep is a secret act of grace. However, this rest is not a permanent sleep. Between each step, there is a sacred pause. The soul emerges from this rest feeling rejuvenated, much like a flower opening after rain or the dawn rising from the night. Silence is not emptiness, and stillness is not weakness, as the soul's sleep teaches us. It demonstrates that finding peace in life requires being embraced by something much bigger than ourselves, rather than running away from it. In this sense, the soul's sleep is a quiet awakening and a gentle surrender, a conclusion and a beginning. The mere notion of such slumber calms the restless heart. It is sufficient. And to calm the tired soul, to imagine one's inner self resting on the gentle fields of eternity, breathing in time with the stars, and being guarded by an invisible force. In its slumber, the soul is not lost, but rather profoundly discovered, safe in the arms of an eternally loving heart, resting in its most authentic home. As a result, the soul's sleep transforms from a lament to a promise, from a lack to a melody of silence, bearing with it the knowledge that there is an eternal peace that lies beyond all hardship and restlessness. Nothing in this world ever seems to be able to fulfill the deepest yearning that exists within the human spirit. It is a desire that cannot be completely satisfied by material belongings, accomplishments, or transient happiness, because it is a desire for an eternal person rather than a transient one. Every restless moment is the whisper of that memory calling the soul home. The soul carries within it a memory of its source, like a faint echo of a song that was once heard in full. In addition to the ultimate destination beyond this life, the journey toward eternal rest with the Creator also involves the soul's daily, gentle steps toward the one who is both origin and end, both guide and haven. The idea of eternal rest frequently conjures up visions of serene fields, smoothly flowing rivers, or boundless radiance. These are not just works of poetry. They are glimpses of a more profound reality that is difficult for words to express. For eternal rest is the presence of perfect communion, rather than just the absence of suffering or conflict. It is the point at which the soul, exhausted from its wandering, finally rests its head against the Creator's heart and discovers a peace that nothing can shake. In that state, every heartbeat and breath is synchronized with divine tranquility, as if the soul and the infinite breath were one. The path to this kind of rest is paved with both grace and hardship. There are mountains of fleeting joy, valleys of despair, and deserts and storms in the world. Even though it is invisible, a hand is guiding throughout it all. Like a traveler on a long road, the soul may falter, get lost, or stop in exhaustion, but the silent call that pulls it forward never stops. Haste is not required for this call. It extends an invitation. It calls out. Even in the midst of a distracting and noisy world, walking toward eternal peace means answering the whisper, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Sacred texts frequently portray the Creator as a shepherd who guides his flock to placid waters and verdant pastures. This is a portrait of care, guidance, and rest that does not end in hunger or thirst. It is more than just a metaphor. The soul, like a lamb, is finally folded into those pastures where fear has no home and fatigue cannot follow when one imagines eternal rest. The Creator becomes the rest rather than merely permitting it. Being with Him means living in a place where peace is a constant reality rather than a passing feeling. Many people feel that life is a never-ending quest for something that is just out of reach. However, that striving is transformed into serenity by eternal rest. There is no longer any pressure to succeed, no shadow of time running out, and no need to prove oneself in the presence of the Creator. Rather, the soul finds boundless freedom and joy independent of situation. This rest can still be tasted in glimpses today, in prayerful moments, in the silence of wonder at the immensity of creation, in the silent knowledge that one is held even in the dark. The fullness of that rest, however, is still to come, where the light of the Creator is not seen but rather dwelt in, not reflected, but embraced. Speaking of healing is synonymous with speaking of eternal peace. Whether they are physical, emotional, or spiritual, life's wounds frequently leave scars that are impossible to remove with time. However, those wounds are not only bandaged but also changed in the presence of the Creator. The burdensome sorrows become strands in a tapestry of grace, bearing witness to love that persevered through them rather than causing pain. Tears are wiped away, not as if they never happened, but as if their story has been perfectly resolved. Eternal rest is not forgetfulness. Rather, it is the satisfaction of all desires, the healing of all wounds, and the response to all prayers that previously seemed unheard. The soul finds a peace in this eternal communion that is alive, vibrant, and radiant, rather than passive. Picture yourself standing on the edge of a vast ocean, its waters shimmering with light that appears to emanate from within. Imagine hearing a harmony that the heart instantly recognizes, even though it has never heard it before. Music that is not produced by instruments, but is instead woven into the very fabric of being. This is the rest with the Creator, a place where tranquility is not just the stilling of chaos, but the infusion of divine beauty into each and every part of the soul. Even though the way to this rest may seem obscure, it is actually closer than breath. Every act of love, every moment of trust, and every act of fear, surrender, are all steps toward it. The Creator wants the heart to turn and the soul to be willing to return home, not perfection. And when that ultimate moment of surrender comes, it is an awakening into all that is real and timeless rather than a disappearance into nothingness. Finally, the soul discovers its true rhythm and rests in the embrace for which it was created, no longer searching because it has been completely discovered. The sweetness of belonging is also a part of this eternal rest. The human heart hurts from loneliness so frequently in life, even in romantic relationships and in large crowds. However, loneliness vanishes in the presence of the Creator and is replaced by a deeper form of communion than words can express. The soul is loved, known, and treasured beyond measure. It is not just accepted. To envision spending eternity with Him is to envision a love so immense that it cannot be drained, a friendship so comprehensive that it leaves no trace of absence. The soul yearns for this love, which once it enters, never leaves. The idea of eternal rest can sometimes sound like a lullaby, gentle rivers, soft light, and unwavering silence. At other moments, it feels like victory, over grief, over death, over everything that aimed to weaken the soul. Eternal peace is both comfort and glory, tender and magnificent, so both images are part of it. It is the crowning of a traveler who has completed the most difficult journey, and it is the return of a long-away child. It is the eternal noon where no night comes, and it is the kiss of dawn after the longest night. The heart was made for nothing less, so even though it can hardly contain such visions, it knows they are true. Every anxious prayer, every restless dream, and every silent nighttime sigh all lead to that ultimate sanctuary. The ultimate reality that all life strives for is eternal rest with the Creator, not some far-off myth. And there is no more fear, no more loss, and no more shadow when the soul finally reaches it and lies down in the fields of endless light. Just peace, just love. Only the everlasting presence of the One who has always been the starting point and the destination of all journeys. There are tales that reverberate long after they are told, tales that linger in the quiet moments between heartbeats and flow through ancient trees like wind. One such story is that of the giants, whispers from a time when the earth was heavy with mystery, when shadows were longer than reason could measure, and when people stood in awe between heaven and earth. As we draw the curtain of rest, these ancient figures, remembered not only for their size but also for the questions they raise, disappear like mist. They should be viewed as fading silhouettes in the backdrop of a greater narrative, rather than something to be feared or confused over with nervous thoughts tonight. The soft rustle of time itself replaces their voices, beckoning us to close our eyes and take a deep breath. Even though endings have a bittersweet scent, there is something calming about them. A reminder of the weakness of everything that opposes the eternal. The giants, who were so loud and imposing in their ascent, are now only faint whispers. One can practically imagine their imposing forms melting into the ground as the narrative comes to a close, their footsteps vanishing into quiet. Like the last words of a lullaby that lingers in the air after the singer has stopped, what's left is not fear but a silent lesson. A gentle reminder that greatness without grace is a shadow without light. The tale of their fall is also a tale of humanity. Even so, there is peace despite that warning, because the Creator, who once held the world, still does, and His presence is like a soft hand on the shoulder, calming the resting heart. Stillness becomes a gift when the mind feels burdened by mysteries and the heart grows tired of questions. Now that the giant story has evoked wonder, awe, and curiosity, it's time to let the questions fade away like leaves on a peaceful river. They don't have to be carried into sleep by the soul. Rather, let the night wrap itself around you like a cozy blanket. Let the river carry them, and let the current hold them. For there is trust in resting and peace in forgetting, not to leave us empty, but to make room for something softer, peace that soothes the restless heart. The ancient voices go silent. Take a moment to picture yourself standing at dusk on a peaceful hillside. The wind hums a soft tune through the grass, the sun has set, and the stars are beginning to rise. Figures too big for the world, now relegated to memory, cast shadows of their former selves in the distance. You're not afraid of them, you don't go after them, you just observe them as they blend into the twilight and join the embrace of the night. Once more, the earth is silent, the heavens are expansive, and you are small but secure, delicate yet secure. The story ends in silence, as soft as a prayer, instead of sound or flame. There are no enduring monuments left by the forgotten giants. Even the greatest name fades, and even the strongest stone crumbles. All that's left is the Creator's whisper, as gentle as breath on the ear. Rest now, for I am with you. That whisper is more comforting than the memory of might and more powerful than the roar of giants. And the heart's restless stirring subsides as you listen and let that voice become your nighttime lullaby. The final word is the silent presence of peace as the worries fade and the shadows retreat. While the giants are forgotten, the one who created you never forgets you, and his memory is rest. Thus, let us conclude the story as we would the pages of an old book, its edges worn, its ink faded, but its spirit still alive. We close it with thankfulness that even in the most bizarre corners of history, there are lessons that bring us closer to light, rather than with fear or despair. The giants serve as a reminder that even in the fall of the mighty, there is still room for redemption, mercy, and hope. They also serve as a reminder that strength is insufficient and that power without love withers. Our end is not their end. Their quiet is a prelude to the Creator's timeless song, not a state of emptiness. Let's say a prayer during this pause. Chara, and a gentle prayer, like closing your eyes before falling asleep, but not loud or drawn out. May your heart rest in the peace this evening. I hope your dreams are burden-free and your thoughts are as calm as stilled water. I pray that the same person who watched over you in the past will watch over you now and gently pull you into his arms. May the darkness lead you to sleep, where darkness cannot follow and fear cannot infiltrate. And may you awaken in the morning with a smile on your face, knowing that you are loved, cared for, and held. The giants have vanished, their voices muffled, their might recollected only as echo. However, you continue to walk a path that is led by grace rather than shadow, tiny and priceless. And that grace invites you to take a deep breath, relax, and let go of all the burdens you've been carrying throughout the day. This is the calm that stories are supposed to evoke. Not anxiety, but relief. Not cacophony, but tranquility. You are invited to enter that peaceful moment where time seems to slow down and the soul feels secure enough to sleep, as if you were entering a moonlit meadow. And let me end with a kind word of encouragement before we completely fall into silence. Allow your heart to share if this story has lifted you up or brought you even a brief moment of calm. By liking, commenting, or subscribing, you can leave a tiny trace of your presence, like a footprint on soft soil, allowing this circle of peaceful storytelling to spread and reach others who are in need of quiet as well. When your heart is prepared for more, allow it to gently wander into the other stories that are waiting here. Stories of truth, light, and mercy that calm the soul and quiet the mind. Let the story rest for now. Allow the voices to wane. As the night deepens, allow the silence to envelop you. Words, strength, and shadows are all gone for the forgotten giants. All that's left is the steady, gentle whisper of the Creator calling your soul to peace. And let that whisper be the lullaby that lulls you to sleep as your breath slows and your eyes get heavy. Shut your eyes. Get some rest. Rest easy. You're not by yourself. You're being held.